They called her cursed, barren, a waste of a woman. So the town decided to play a cruel joke, send her to a broken widower 20 miles into the wilderness, expecting her to disappear forever. But they never imagined what would happen next. The woman they threw away would return holding a child in her arms, and the man they pitied would stand beside her, ready to fight the world. This is a story of love born from cruelty, family forged from rejection, and the greatest comeback the West ever witnessed. Stay with me until the very end, and drop a comment below telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1887 pressed down on Dusty Hollow like a heavy hand, thick with heat and the kind of silence that came before storms. The sky stretched endless and blue above the wooden buildings, the dirt roads, the faces of people who had known each other their whole lives and judged each other just as long. Evelyn Carter stood on the porch of her childhood home, a single carpet bag clutched in her hands. The leather was worn soft from years of use, the brass clasp tarnished. Inside were 3 dresses, a Bible her mother had given her, and a small portrait of her parents from before the consumption took them both. Everything she owned in the world fit into that bag. She was 24 years old, unmarried, and according to every doctor who had examined her, incapable of bearing children. In a town like Dusty Hollow, that made her less than nothing. "You ready, girl?" Her uncle's voice came from behind her, flat and impatient. Harold Carter had taken her in after her parents died, not out of love, but out of obligation, and he'd made sure she knew the difference every single day for the past 6 years. Evelyn didn't turn around. "Yes, Uncle Harold." "Good. The wagon's waiting. Don't make them wait any longer than they have to." She heard his boots on the wooden floor, retreating back into the house. No goodbye. No wish for safe travels. Nothing but the creak of the screen door closing behind him. Evelyn looked out at the town one last time. Main Street stretched before her, lined with the general store, the blacksmith, the church where she'd been baptized, the schoolhouse where she'd learned to read. She knew every building, every face, every stone in the road. And they knew her. They knew her as the Carter girl who couldn't have babies, the one the doctors had examined and declared incomplete, the one whose engagement to Thomas Whitmore had been broken off the moment he learned the truth, the one who had become a burden to her uncle, an embarrassment to her family name, a problem that needed to be solved. Today, they were solving it. The wagon waited at the end of the path, driven by old Samuel, who delivered mail and supplies to the far-flung ranches outside of town. He sat hunched on the driver's seat, not meeting her eyes. "Morning, Miss Carter," he mumbled. "Morning, Samuel." She climbed up onto the wagon bed, settling herself among the crates and barrels. Samuel clicked his tongue, and the horses began to move. As the wagon rolled down Main Street, Evelyn kept her head high. She could feel them watching. Mrs. Henderson from the dress shop, standing in her doorway with pins in her mouth. The Jacobson boys snickering behind their hands. Old Widow Marsh shaking her head slowly like Evelyn was already dead and just hadn't realized it yet. And there, standing outside the saloon, was Thomas Whitmore, the man who had promised to marry her, the man who had held her hand and talked about the children they would have, the farm they would build, the life they would share, the man who had looked at her with such disgust when the doctor's report came back that she'd thought she might die from the shame of it. Thomas raised his hand in a lazy wave, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Safe travels, Evelyn," he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Give my regards to the widower." Laughter rippled through the watching crowd. Evelyn didn't respond. She kept her eyes forward, her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight as a fence post. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The wagon rolled past the church, past the cemetery where her parents lay buried, past the wooden sign that read Dusty Hollow, population 347. The number would be 346 now, she supposed. One less mouth to feed, one less problem to solve. Samuel drove in silence for the first mile, but eventually he cleared his throat. "I'm sorry about all this, Miss Carter. Truly I am." "It's not your fault, Samuel." "No, but—" He trailed off, spat tobacco juice over the side of the wagon. "It ain't right what they're doing, shipping you off like you're cattle." "They're doing what they think is best." "Best for who?" Samuel shook his head. "You're a good woman, Miss Carter. Hard worker, kind heart. You don't deserve this. Evelyn watched the landscape roll by, the green fields turning to brown scrubland, the trees growing sparse, the mountains rising purple in the distance. Maybe not, but deserving has never had much to do with what people get in this life. Samuel fell silent after that. The story of how Evelyn Carter came to be sent away began months before, in the parlor of Dr. Harrison's office. She had gone for a routine examination, nothing serious, some fatigue, some irregularity in her monthly cycles. Dr. Harrison was an old family friend. He'd delivered Evelyn herself 24 years ago. She trusted him. That trust shattered when he sat her down, his face grave, and explained what his examination had revealed. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. There's no easy way to say this." He removed his spectacles, polishing them slowly. "You have a condition, a malformation of the womb. It's very unlikely that you'll ever be able to carry a child." The words hadn't made sense at first. She'd heard them, but they'd bounced off her mind like stones off water. "What do you mean?" "I mean that bearing children is almost certainly impossible for you. I've seen this condition before, in other women. Some live full, happy lives regardless. But for a young woman hoping to marry and start a family," he shook his head. "I'm deeply sorry." Evelyn had walked home in a daze. She'd sat in her room for hours staring at the wall, trying to understand what this meant for her future. She was engaged to Thomas Whitmore. The wedding was set for spring. They had talked about having 4 children, maybe 5. Thomas wanted sons to help work his father's land. Evelyn had imagined herself surrounded by little ones, their laughter filling a warm home. That dream had evaporated like morning mist. The decision to tell Thomas was the hardest one she'd ever made. She knew the risk. She knew what it might cost her. But she couldn't marry him under false pretenses. She couldn't let him find out later, after it was too late. So she told him. She remembered every detail of that conversation, the way his face had changed, shifting from confusion to understanding to something cold and hard. The way he'd pulled his hand away from hers. The way he'd stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at nothing for a long, terrible moment. "You can't have children," he'd said finally. Not a question. "The doctor says it's very unlikely, almost impossible." "Almost?" Thomas had laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Almost impossible. That's not good enough, Evelyn. My family needs heirs. My father needs grandsons. I can't marry a woman who can't give me that. Thomas, please. The engagement is off." He turned to face her, and his eyes were empty of any love she thought she'd seen there. "I'll tell people you broke it off, that you changed your mind. I won't humiliate you publicly." "How generous," she'd whispered. "It's more than you deserve for wasting my time." The words had cut deep, deeper than she'd expected. But the worst was yet to come. Thomas had kept his promise not to humiliate her publicly, but someone else hadn't been so kind. Within a week, the whole town knew. Evelyn never found out who had talked. Maybe Dr. Harrison's nurse, maybe Thomas himself after a few too many drinks. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. The whispers followed her everywhere. The stares, the pity from some, the contempt from others. Mothers pulled their daughters away when she walked by, as if barrenness were contagious. Young men who might have courted her before suddenly found reasons to look elsewhere. And her Uncle Harold, who had never been warm, grew openly hostile. "You're a burden," he'd told her one night, after too much whiskey. "A useless mouth to feed. No man will have you now. You'll die an old maid in my house, eating my food, taking up space." "I can work," Evelyn had said. "I can earn my keep." "Work?" Harold had laughed. "Doing what? Sewing? Taking in laundry? You think that'll cover the shame you've brought on this family?" Evelyn had wanted to argue that she'd brought no shame on anyone, that she hadn't chosen her condition, that it wasn't her fault, but she knew it would do no good. In Harold's eyes, in the town's eyes, she was damaged goods. A failure as a woman. A joke. And that's exactly what gave someone the idea. But the plan had been hatched in the back room of Miller's saloon over cards and cheap whiskey. Evelyn wasn't there, of course, but she heard about it later, from Samuel, from the shamefaced looks of people who'd participated, from the cruel satisfaction in her uncle's eyes when he told her what had been decided. "There's a man," Harold had said, "out west of here, Cole Maddox. You know the name? Evelyn had shaken her head. He's a widower, lost his wife and boy to fever. Oh, must be 4 years ago now. Lives alone on a ranch, 20 miles out, never comes to town. People say he's half mad with grief. What does this have to do with me? Harold had smiled, and it was not a kind smile. The town council has decided to send you out there. As a housekeeper, of sorts. He needs someone to cook and clean. You need somewhere to go. It's a perfect match. A match? Evelyn had felt her stomach drop. You mean a marriage? No, nothing so formal. Harold had waved his hand dismissively. Just an arrangement. You'll keep his house, he'll give you a roof over your head. Everyone wins. Evelyn had known, even then, that there was more to it. The way Harold couldn't quite meet her eyes. The way he rushed to explain the details. The way the whole thing felt like a punchline waiting to be delivered. It wasn't until she overheard Thomas Whitmore and his friends laughing about it outside the general store that she understood. Send the barren woman to the broken widower, Thomas had said, slapping his knee. Let them cancel each other out. Two useless people, stuck together in the middle of nowhere. It's perfect. The others had roared with laughter. Maybe he'll put a baby in her anyway. Miracles do happen. Or maybe she'll finish him off, put the poor bastard out of his misery. Evelyn had stood frozen in the shadow of the building, her heart pounding, her face burning with shame. This was what her life had become. A joke, a cruel amusement for people with nothing better to do. She could have refused. She could have stayed in Dusty Hollow, endured the whispers and the stares, scraped together a living as best she could. But what would that accomplish? She would still be alone, still be pitied, still be the subject of every cruel joke that bored minds could invent. At least out there, with this Cole Maddox, she would be away from them. At least she would have work to do, a purpose to serve. At least she wouldn't have to see Thomas Whitmore's smirking face every time she walked down the street. So she had agreed. And now here she was, bouncing along in Samuel's wagon, watching her old life disappear behind her. The journey took most of the day. The road, if it could be called a road, wound through increasingly wild country, past rock formations and dry creek beds, through stands of juniper and scrub oak. The heat was relentless, pressing down on them like a weight. Samuel stopped twice to water the horses, and once to relieve himself behind a boulder. Each time, Evelyn remained on the wagon, her carpet bag beside her, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "You sure about this, Miss Carter?" Samuel asked during the second stop. "It ain't too late to turn back." "And go where?" Samuel had no answer for that. By late afternoon, the landscape began to change. The scrubland gave way to rolling grassland, green with summer growth. In the distance, Evelyn could see a cluster of buildings, a house, a barn, various outbuildings, nestled in a shallow valley. Smoke rose from a chimney despite the heat. "That's the Maddox place," Samuel said, pointing. "Last stop on the line." Evelyn felt her heart begin to race. This was it. This was where she would live now, possibly for the rest of her life. This strange, isolated ranch, with a man she'd never met, far from everything and everyone she'd ever known. What if he was cruel? What if he was mad, as people said? What if he took one look at her and sent her away, leaving her stranded with nowhere to go? What if? She gripped her carpet bag tighter and forced herself to breathe. The wagon rattled down the final stretch of road, and the Maddox Ranch came into clearer view. The house was larger than Evelyn had expected, 2 stories, solidly built, with a wide porch running along the front. It looked well-maintained but lonely, somehow. No curtains in the windows, no flowers in the yard, no signs of life except for that thin trail of smoke. As the wagon approached, a figure emerged from the barn. Evelyn's first impression of Cole Maddox was of size. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and arms roped with muscle. He wore a faded work shirt, dusty trousers, boots that had seen better days. His hair was dark, shot through with early gray at the temples, and his face was half hidden by a thick beard. He watched the wagon approach without moving, his expression unreadable. Samuel pulled the horses to a stop in front of the house. "Afternoon, Mr. Maddox." "Samuel," Cole's voice was deep, rough from disuse. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes narrowing slightly. "This the woman they wrote about?" Yes, sir. Miss Evelyn Carter from Dusty Hollow. Cole studied her for a long moment. Evelyn met his gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to be the first to break. She looks half drowned, Cole said finally. Evelyn glanced down at herself. The journey had not been kind. Her dress was rumpled, her hair escaping from its pins, dust clinging to every inch of her. She supposed she did look rather bedraggled. It's been a long trip, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. The road wasn't easy. No, Cole agreed. It never is. He turned to Samuel. You staying for supper? Can't. Need to get back before dark. My wife will skin me alive if I'm late again. Cole nodded. He reached up to help Evelyn down from the wagon, and she was startled by the gentleness in his grip. His hands were rough with calluses, but he handled her as carefully as if she were made of glass. Thank you, she murmured. He didn't respond. Samuel passed down her carpet bag, tipped his hat, and clicked his tongue at the horses. Within moments, the wagon was rolling away, leaving Evelyn standing in front of the ranch house with a stranger. So, Cole said. So, she echoed. They stood there in uncomfortable silence. Evelyn could hear the wind moving through the grass, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of the windmill behind the barn. Cole seemed in no hurry to speak. He simply stood, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Finally, Evelyn squared her shoulders. I understand you need someone to keep house, cook, clean, that sort of thing. That's what the letter said. Well, she lifted her chin. I can do all that. I've kept house for my uncle for 6 years. I'm a good cook. I don't mind hard work. I won't cause trouble. Cole's expression didn't change. What else did the letter say? Evelyn hesitated. I don't know. I wasn't allowed to read it. No? A flicker of something, surprise, amusement, crossed his face. Then you don't know what they wrote about you. Her stomach tightened. I can imagine. Can you? They probably told you I'm... She forced the word out. Barren. That no man in town will have me. That I'm a burden to my family and a problem they needed to solve. She held his gaze, daring him to pity her, daring him to mock. They probably thought it was funny, sending me here. 2 broken people stuck together in the middle of nowhere. A great joke. Cole was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and held it out to her. Evelyn took it with trembling hands. She unfolded it, scanned the words, and felt her face flush hot with shame. The letter was exactly as cruel as she'd feared. It described her condition in clinical detail. It mentioned that she was plain of face and past her prime. It expressed confidence that Cole would have no interest in her as a woman, and suggested that she might serve as a suitable companion for a man already broken by grief. The whole thing dripped with condescension and barely concealed mockery. At the bottom, in Thomas Whitmore's handwriting, was a postscript. Don't bother sending her back. We have no use for her here. Evelyn crumpled the letter in her fist. She wanted to throw it on the ground, to stomp on it, to set it on fire. But she wouldn't give them that satisfaction, even if they weren't here to see it. Well, she said, her voice only slightly unsteady. Now you know the truth. If you want me to leave, I'll understand. Cole looked at her. For the first time, something shifted in his expression, a softening, perhaps, or maybe just a lessening of the hardness. Where would you go? I don't know, somewhere. Anywhere. There's nothing for 20 miles in any direction, he said flatly. No towns, no settlements, nothing. You'd die before you got halfway. Then I suppose I'm at your mercy. Nobody's at nobody's mercy here. Cole turned away, heading toward the house. You'll stay. There's plenty of work to be done, and I won't turn away a willing pair of hands. But let's be clear about something. He stopped, looking back at her over his shoulder. I didn't ask for you. I didn't want a housekeeper, or a companion, or whatever fool notion those people had in their heads. My wife died 4 years ago, and I've been doing just fine on my own since then. Evelyn nodded. I understand. I doubt that. His voice was harsh, but his eyes held something that might have been pain. But it doesn't matter. You're here now. Might as well make the best of it. He walked up the porch steps and through the front door, leaving it open behind him. Evelyn stood alone in the fading light, clutching her carpet bag, staring at the house that was now her home. Make the best of it. She'd been doing that her whole life. This was just one more thing to survive. The inside of the house was cleaner than Evelyn expected, but emptier than she could have imagined. The main room served as both parlor and kitchen, with a stone fireplace at one end and a cast-iron stove at the other. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs sat in the middle. Shelves lined the walls, mostly bare except for a few dishes and some canned goods. The floor was swept clean, the windows dusty but intact. But it was the absence of things that struck her most. No pictures on the walls, no books on the shelves, no personal touches of any kind. It was a house stripped to its bones, a place where someone existed but didn't really live. Cole stood by the stove, poking at a fire. Your room is upstairs, first door on the right. There's a bed, a chest for your things. Outhouse is behind the barn, pumps in the yard. Thank you. Supper's in an hour. I hope you can do better than what I've been making. Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. I'm sure I can manage. She climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor. The hallway was dark, lit only by a small window at the far end. 3 doors opened off it, all closed. She opened the first door on the right and found a small spare bedroom. A narrow bed with a faded quilt, a wooden chest at the foot, a window overlooking the yard. That was all. It was more than she'd had at her uncle's house, where she'd slept in a converted storage room barely big enough to turn around in. Evelyn set her carpet bag on the bed and allowed herself one moment of weakness. She pressed her hands to her face, closed her eyes, and breathed. She was here. She was alive. She had a roof over her head and work to do. Whatever else happened, she would survive this. She had survived everything else life had thrown at her. She would survive this too. She opened her eyes, straightened her spine, and began to unpack. Supper that night was simple. Beans and cornbread, the best Evelyn could manage with what she found in the pantry, but Cole ate it without complaint. They sat across from each other at the rough table, not speaking, the silence broken only by the scrape of forks and the crackling of the fire. Evelyn studied him covertly as they ate. In the lamplight, she could see his face more clearly. He was not handsome, his features were too rough, too weathered, but there was a strength in his jaw, a steadiness in his eyes. He looked like a man who had been through hell and come out the other side, not unscathed, but still standing. The pantry's low, she said finally. I'll need supplies if I'm to cook properly. Cole nodded. I go to town once a month. Next trip's in 2 weeks. Is there a garden? I could plant vegetables. There was. His voice went flat. My wife kept it. After she... He stopped, swallowed hard. I let it go. I'm sorry. Cole looked at her sharply, as if expecting mockery. When he found only genuine sympathy, something in his expression shifted. It's been 4 years, he said quietly. You'd think it would get easier. Does it? No. He stood abruptly, carrying his plate to the basin by the pump. I'm going to check on the stock. Don't wait up. He was out the door before Evelyn could respond. She sat alone at the table for a long time, listening to the silence of the house, thinking about the man who lived within it. They had both been broken by life, she realized. Different breaks, different pains, but the same result. 2 people cast adrift, left to survive as best they could. Maybe that was why they'd been matched. Not as a joke, not as a punishment, but as some kind of cosmic symmetry. Or maybe she was just trying to find meaning where there was none. Either way, she was here now. And tomorrow, she would begin the work of making this house into something more than a shrine to grief. Gimdi? The first weeks were the hardest. Cole and Evelyn circled each other like wary animals, each unsure what to expect from the other. He kept to his work, cattle, fences, a dozen tasks that kept him outdoors from dawn to dusk, while she threw herself into the house. There was more than enough to keep her busy. The pantry needed organizing. The floors needed scrubbing. The windows were so thick with grime that she could barely see through them. The garden, which she discovered behind the house, was a tangle of weeds and dead growth that had once been neat rows of vegetables and herbs. She started there, on her hands and knees in the dirt, pulling weeds and turning soil. It was back-breaking work, made harder by the summer heat, but she welcomed it. Physical exhaustion was better than thinking, better than remembering. Cole noticed. He didn't say anything directly. He rarely spoke more than a few words at a time, but she saw him watching from the barn. And one morning, she found a pair of gardening gloves left on the porch. They were old, clearly belonging to his wife, but they fit Evelyn's hands well enough. She wore them every day after that. Little by little, the house began to change. Evelyn scrubbed the windows until they sparkled. She organized the pantry, arranged the dishes, hung curtains she sewed from fabric she found in a trunk in the attic. She brought in wildflowers from the fields and put them in a tin cup on the table. Cole didn't comment on any of it, but he noticed. She could tell by the way his eyes lingered on small details, by the slight softening of his expression when he came in from work to find the house warm and bright. And she noticed things too. The fence that had been leaning when she arrived was suddenly straight. The loose board on the porch that had caught her foot the first morning was now firmly nailed in place. The woodpile, which had been adequate before, was suddenly twice as high, enough to last through any winter. They were taking care of each other, she realized. Not in words, they rarely spoke more than necessary, but in actions, in the quiet language of work and need. It wasn't love. It wasn't even friendship, not yet. But it was something. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Cole came inside to find Evelyn sitting at the table with an old photograph in her hands. She looked up, startled, and he saw that her eyes were red. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, setting the photograph down. "I found it in the pantry behind some jars. I wasn't trying to pry." "It's all right." Cole's voice was rough. He crossed the room, picked up the photograph, and studied it for a long moment. Evelyn watched him, her heart aching. The photograph showed a young woman with dark hair and a gentle smile, holding a baby boy in her arms. Both were laughing at something outside the frame. "Her name was Sarah," Cole said finally. "The boy was Daniel. He was 2 years old when the fever took them." "I'm so sorry." "Everyone is." He set the photograph down carefully, face down on the table. "Sorry doesn't bring them back." "No, it doesn't." Cole looked at her, and for the first time she saw something other than grief in his eyes. Pain, yes, loss, but also something like recognition, the look of one wounded soul acknowledging another. "They told me about you, as he said, in the letter, what happened, why they sent you." Evelyn felt her face flush. They told me a lot of things." Cole cut her off. "Most of it cruel. Some of it probably true. But what they didn't tell me was what kind of woman you are." "And what kind is that?" "The kind who gets knocked down and gets back up. The kind who keeps going when anyone else would have quit." He paused. "The kind who deserves better than what life has given her." Evelyn's eyes stung with sudden tears. It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in years. "You don't know me," she whispered. "You don't know what I am." "I know what I see." Cole's voice was gruff but not unkind. "I see a woman who works hard, who doesn't complain, who's trying to make something good out of a bad situation. That's more than most people manage." He turned away, heading for the door. "I'm going to check on the horses. Supper smells good." And then he was gone, leaving Evelyn alone with her tears and the photograph lying face down on the table. She picked it up, turned it over, and looked at the face of the woman who had lived in this house before her. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the photograph. "I'm sorry for your loss, but I promise I'll take care of him, as best I can." She didn't know if it was a promise she could keep, but she made it anyway. Summer faded into autumn, and autumn brought the first hints of what was to come. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. The garden that Evelyn had coaxed back to life yielded its harvest: squash and beans, tomatoes and peppers, enough to fill the pantry for winter. Cole butchered a steer and they spent days smoking and salting the meat, working side by side in companionable silence. Their routine had settled into something almost comfortable. Mornings, Cole was up before dawn, heading out to tend the cattle. Evelyn rose shortly after, lighting the stove, starting breakfast, preparing for the day's work. They ate together, rarely speaking but no longer straining against the silence. Then Cole would leave and Evelyn would turn to her tasks: cleaning, cooking, mending, preserving. Evenings were different. Evenings were when the silence felt less comfortable and more like a wall between them. Cole would come in from the fields, eat his supper, and then sit by the fire, staring into the flames. Sometimes Evelyn would sit with him, mending clothes or knitting. Sometimes she would go to bed early, leaving him alone with his ghosts. But one night, about 2 months after her arrival, something changed. She had been working on a quilt, a project she'd started to keep her hands busy during the long autumn evenings, when Cole suddenly spoke. "You sing." Evelyn looked up, startled. "What?" "When you work, in the kitchen, in the garden, you sing. I've heard you." She felt her face flush. She hadn't realized anyone was listening. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb. I didn't say it was disturbing." Cole was still looking into the fire. "It's been a long time since there was singing in this house." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "My mother used to sing to me. When I was little, after she died, I would sing to myself, to remember her voice." Cole nodded slowly. "Sarah sang too, all the time, said it made the work go faster. She sounds like she was a wonderful woman." "She was." His voice cracked slightly on the words. "She was the best thing that ever happened to me. Her and Daniel. And when they died, I thought I would die too. I wanted to." Evelyn set down her quilting. "But you didn't." "No, I didn't." Cole finally turned to look at her. "Some days I still don't know why. Maybe because there was still something worth living for, even if you couldn't see it yet." He studied her face in the firelight. "Maybe." They sat in silence for a long time after that. But it was a different kind of silence, not the cold absence of connection, but the warm quiet of two people who understood each other's pain. Before she went to bed, Evelyn paused at the foot of the stairs. "Cole?" He looked up. "Thank you for letting me stay." He nodded once, gruffly. "Thank you for staying. It wasn't much, but it was something." Tati. The first snow came in early November. Evelyn woke to a world transformed, white and silent, the landscape softened and strange. She stood at her window for a long time, watching the snow drift down, feeling something shift inside her. This was her life now. This place, this house, this man. For better or worse, she was here, and she would make the best of it. She went downstairs to start breakfast and found Cole already up, adding wood to the fire. "It's going to be a hard winter," he said without looking up. "I can feel it in my bones." "Then we'd better be ready for it." He glanced at her then, and something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "Yeah, I reckon we'd better." They worked side by side that day, preparing the ranch for winter. Cole reinforced the barn and checked the cattle. Evelyn sealed the windows, stocked the pantry, made sure the house was as warm and tight as possible. By nightfall, the snow was falling thick and fast, and the world outside had disappeared into a curtain of white. They sat by the fire together, drinking coffee, watching the flames. "This arrangement," Cole said suddenly, "what they set up back in Dusty Hollow. It was supposed to be temporary, wasn't it? Just until they figured out something else to do with you?" Evelyn's heart stuttered. I don't know. They never said. They'll forget about you, you know, out of sight, out of mind. That's how people are." "I know." "So what will you do?" Cole turned to face her. "When spring comes, when the road's clear, will you go back?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. She thought about Dusty Hollow, the whispers, the stares, the cruelty of people she'd known her whole life. She thought about Thomas Whitmore and his smirking face. She thought about her Uncle Harold and his cold, dismissive eyes. And then she thought about this house, this land, this man, the work she'd done here, the life she'd begun to build. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think I will." Cole nodded slowly, and there was something in his eyes that looked almost like relief. "Good," he said. "That's good." They didn't speak of it again that night, but something had shifted between them. Some invisible line had been crossed. They were no longer just two strangers sharing a house. They were something else now, something neither of them had words for yet. But it was growing, quietly, steadily, like the snow piling up outside their door. And whatever it was, neither of them was ready to let it go. The winter pressed in, harsh and unrelenting. The snow kept falling day after day until it seemed like the world had been swallowed up in white. The wind howled across the open land, driving drifts against the house, making it impossible to venture outside for more than a few minutes at a time. Cole and Evelyn were trapped together, two people who had spent months circling each other, now forced into constant proximity. It could have been a disaster. It could have broken whatever fragile peace they'd built. Instead, it deepened it. They talked, really talked, for the first time. Cole told her about his childhood in Texas, about coming west to make his fortune, about meeting Sarah at a church social and knowing, from the first moment he saw her, that she was the one. He told her about Daniel, about the joy of holding his newborn son for the first time, about the dreams they'd had for his future. And he told her about the fever, the 3 terrible weeks when both Sarah and Daniel had burned with sickness, the helplessness of watching them slip away. The morning he'd woken to silence and known, before he even opened his eyes, that they were gone. Evelyn listened to it all. And when he was done, she told him her story too. She told him about her parents, both taken by consumption before she was 18, about moving in with her uncle, a cold and bitter man who saw her as nothing but a burden, about Thomas Whitmore, who had promised her the world and then abandoned her the moment he learned the truth, about the whispers and the stares, the cruel jokes, the letter that had sent her here like unwanted cargo. When she finished, Cole was silent for a long moment. They were fools, he said finally, all of them. Fools who couldn't see what was right in front of their eyes. And what's that? He looked at her, and his eyes were soft in a way she'd never seen before. A woman worth more than any 10 of them combined. Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes. You don't have to say that. I know. I said it because it's true. They sat there, the fire crackling between them, the storm raging outside, and something wordless passed between them. Not love. Not yet. But the possibility of it, waiting in the silence like a seed in winter soil. Oh. The blizzard struck on the coldest night of the year. It came without warning, a wall of white sweeping down from the mountains, bringing temperatures so low that the pump froze solid and the cattle huddled together for warmth in the barn. Cole and Evelyn had been preparing for bed when they heard it, a pounding at the door, desperate and frantic. Cole grabbed his rifle. Evelyn hung back, her heart racing. Who's there? Cole called out. Please! A woman's voice, high and terrified. Please, let us in. We'll die out here. Cole exchanged a look with Evelyn. Then he unbarred the door. 4 people tumbled in from the storm. A young couple, a middle-aged man, and an elderly woman. They were half frozen, their clothes soaked, their faces blue with cold. Our wagon broke down, the young man gasped. 3 miles back. We walked here. It was the only light we could see. Get them by the fire, Cole ordered. Evelyn, blankets, hot coffee, anything warm. What followed was a night of controlled chaos. Evelyn worked without stopping, heating water, preparing food, finding dry clothes for the strangers. Cole tended to the animals, made sure the house was secure, kept the fire blazing high. By midnight, the travelers were warm and fed, wrapped in blankets by the fire. The young couple, Samuel and Mary, were newlyweds heading west. The middle-aged man, Jonathan, was a traveling preacher. The elderly woman, Mrs. Gibson, was his mother. You saved our lives, Mary said, her voice trembling. We would have died out there. You would have done the same, Evelyn said. Would we? Mrs. Gibson's voice was soft but knowing. Not everyone would have opened their door on a night like this. Not everyone would have risked themselves for strangers. Cole said nothing, but his eyes met Evelyn's across the room, and there was a warmth in them that had nothing to do with the fire. And then the 5th traveler arrived. The knock came just before dawn, when everyone else was finally asleep. Cole answered it with his rifle ready. A man stood on the porch, tall and lean, his face hidden by a scarf, his eyes cold and calculating. I need shelter, he said. Something about him made Cole's instinct scream warning, but the storm was still raging, and even a dangerous man was still a man who would freeze to death without shelter. Come in, Cole said, but keep your hands where I can see them. The stranger's name was Jack Harlan, and it didn't take long for Cole to realize what he was. The way he moved, the way his eyes scanned the room, the bulge under his coat that could only be a weapon, an outlaw, maybe a killer. And now he was in their house. Evelyn saw it too. She moved closer to Cole, her hand finding his arm in a gesture that could have been fear or support or both. Harlan noticed. "Your wife?" he asked, nodding at Evelyn. Cole hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Then he said, "Yes, this is my wife." The lie came out smoothly, naturally, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. Evelyn felt her heart stop. Then she placed her hand on Cole's arm more firmly and said, "I'll make coffee for everyone." She moved to the stove, her hands shaking, her mind racing. Cole had called her his wife. In front of a dangerous man, to protect her, to protect them both, he had claimed her as his own. It was a lie. Of course it was a lie. But as she stood there, stirring coffee she couldn't taste, she realized that she wished it wasn't. The night passed in tense silence. Harlan sat apart from the others, watching everything with those cold, calculating eyes. Cole stayed awake, his rifle across his lap, never taking his attention from the stranger. By morning, the storm had broken. Harlan accepted a plate of breakfast, thanked Evelyn with exaggerated courtesy, and headed for the door. "Much obliged for the hospitality, Mrs. Maddox," he said, and there was something knowing in his smile. "And to you, Mr. Maddox, you've got yourself a good woman there. I hope you appreciate her." "I do," Cole said quietly. "Every day." Harlan tipped his hat and disappeared into the snow. When he was gone, Cole and Evelyn stood together on the porch, watching until he was out of sight. "I'm sorry," Cole said finally, "for what I said, for calling you my wife. I didn't know what else to do. You were protecting us. I was protecting you." He turned to face her, and his eyes were more open than she'd ever seen them. "Evelyn, But before he could finish, Samuel appeared at the door, asking about breakfast, and the moment was broken. They didn't speak of it again that day or the next, but something had changed between them. The lie had become a door, and both of them knew that eventually they would have to decide whether to walk through it. The travelers left 2 days later when the roads cleared enough to pass. The Gibsons headed west to find their wagon. Samuel and Mary continued toward California. They pressed money into Evelyn's hands, money she tried to refuse and they wouldn't take back. "You saved us," Mary said, hugging her tight. "We'll never forget it." Then they were gone, and Cole and Evelyn were alone again. But alone felt different now. The house felt warmer, fuller, as if the presence of those strangers had reminded them what it meant to share a space, to take care of each other, to be a family. That night, Cole said the words that had been building for months. "I'm glad you stayed, Evelyn. I'm glad you're here." She looked at him across the table, the fire crackling between them, the world outside white and cold and far away. "So am I," she said. "So am I." And for the first time since she'd arrived at this lonely ranch in the middle of nowhere, Evelyn Carter felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel: hope. The winter that followed the blizzard was the longest Evelyn could remember, but it was also the first winter in years that she didn't spend wishing for it to end. Something had shifted in the house after that terrible night when the strangers had come seeking shelter. Something had shifted between her and Cole. The lie he had told, "This is my wife," hung in the air between them like smoke that wouldn't dissipate, present in every glance, every accidental touch, every silence that stretched just a moment too long. They didn't speak of it directly. Neither of them was brave enough for that. But they circled around it constantly, two people dancing at the edge of something neither fully understood. The days fell into a rhythm. Cole would rise before dawn, bundle himself against the cold, and head out to tend the cattle. The winter had been brutal on the herd. They'd lost 3 head to the cold already, and Cole spent most of his daylight hours making sure they didn't lose more. Evelyn would have breakfast waiting when he came in, his face red from the wind, his beard crusted with ice. They would eat together, and sometimes Cole would linger over his coffee, talking about the weather or the cattle or nothing at all, just to stay in the warmth a little longer. In the afternoons, while Cole worked the land, Evelyn worked the house. She had transformed it in the months since her arrival, not dramatically, not in ways that erased the memory of Sarah, but in small touches that made the space feel lived in again. Curtains in the windows, flowers dried and arranged in jars, a quilt she'd pieced together from scraps draped over the back of the chair by the fire. Cole noticed everything, though he rarely commented. But Evelyn would catch him sometimes, running his fingers over the edge of a new cushion or pausing to look at the way the afternoon light caught the curtains. And in those moments, his face would soften in a way that made her heart ache. One evening in late January, a month after the blizzard, they sat together by the fire as they did most nights. Evelyn was mending one of Cole's shirts. The man went through clothes like they were made of paper, and Cole was staring into the flames, lost in whatever thoughts haunted him in the quiet hours. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said, not looking up from her needle. Cole stirred. "You can ask. Doesn't mean I'll answer." A small smile tugged at her lips. She'd grown used to his gruffness, had learned to hear the warmth hidden beneath it. "Fair enough." She tied off her thread, smoothed the mended fabric, and set the shirt aside. "That night, when the strangers came, when that man, Harlan, asked if I was your wife." She paused, gathering her courage. "You didn't hesitate. You said yes like it was the most natural thing in the world." Cole was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moaned against the walls. "I said what needed to be said," he replied finally. "Man like that, looking at a woman alone, unprotected. I've seen what happens. I wasn't going to let that happen to you." "I know, and I'm grateful." Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. "But that's not what I'm asking." Cole turned to look at her then, and his eyes were dark and unreadable. "Then what are you asking?" "I'm asking—" She stopped, suddenly unsure. What was she asking? Why it had felt so natural? Why some part of her had wanted it to be true? Why she lay awake at night thinking about it, turning the moment over in her mind like a stone worn smooth by water? "Never mind," she said quietly. "It doesn't matter." Cole stood abruptly, crossing to the window. He stood there with his back to her, looking out at the snow-covered darkness. "It matters," he said, his voice rough. "It matters more than you know." Evelyn's heart began to pound. "What do you mean?" For a long moment, Cole didn't answer. Then he turned around, and his face was a battlefield of emotions, fear and longing, and something that looked almost like pain. "When I said those words," he began, then stopped, started again. "When I called you my wife, it wasn't just to protect you. It was because—" He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Because for just a moment, I wanted it to be true." The words hung in the air between them, heavy as snowfall. Evelyn couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only sit there, her hands trembling in her lap, her eyes fixed on this man who had been a stranger 6 months ago and was now— What? What was he now? "Cole, I know I have no right," he continued, the words coming faster now, like water breaking through a dam. "I know what they told you about me, that I'm broken, half mad with grief. And maybe they're right, maybe I am. But these past months, having you here, watching you bring this house back to life—" He shook his head. "I thought I was done, Evelyn. I thought I'd buried my heart with Sarah and Daniel. I thought there was nothing left." "And now?" He looked at her, and his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "Now I'm not so sure." Evelyn rose slowly, her legs unsteady. She crossed the room to where he stood, stopping just an arm's length away, close enough to touch, if either of them dared. "I came here expecting nothing," she said softly. "They sent me as a joke, a punishment. They expected me to fail, to suffer, to disappear." She reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "But instead I found—" "What?" His voice was barely a whisper. "What did you find?" "I found a home." Her voice broke on the word. "For the first time since my parents died, I found a place where I belong, and I found you." Cole's hand came up to cover hers. His palm was rough with calluses, warm despite the cold, and the touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the winter. "Evelyn." Her name on his lips was a prayer. "I can't promise you anything. I'm still broken, still grieving. I don't know if I'll ever be whole again. I'm not asking for promises." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of him through her dress. I'm not asking for anything except what you're willing to give. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The fire crackled. The wind howled. And then Cole Maddox did something he hadn't done in 4 years. He pulled her into his arms and held her close. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't a declaration. It was just two people clinging to each other in the darkness, two broken souls finding comfort in the warmth of another heartbeat. They stood there for a long time, not speaking, not needing to. And when they finally pulled apart, something had changed between them. The wall that had kept them separate had crumbled, and in its place was something new and fragile and terrifying in its possibility. "We should get some sleep," Cole said finally, his voice rough. Evelyn nodded. "Yes, we should." But neither of them moved. And when they finally did go to their separate rooms, her to the small bedroom upstairs, him to the larger one that had once been his and Sarah's, they both lay awake for hours, listening to the wind and thinking of each other. The next morning, everything was different, and nothing had changed. They ate breakfast together as they always did, made small talk about the weather and the cattle, went about their daily tasks. But there was an awareness between them now, a current that hummed beneath every word and gesture. Cole found excuses to come inside more often, to warm his hands, to fetch a tool he'd forgotten, to ask Evelyn's opinion on some trivial matter. And Evelyn found herself watching for him, listening for his footsteps on the porch, feeling her heart lift whenever he appeared in the doorway. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced. One afternoon, about a week after their conversation by the fire, Cole came in from the barn to find Evelyn crying. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a letter in her hands, tears streaming down her face. She looked up when he entered, and the devastation in her eyes hit him like a physical blow. "What happened?" He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside her chair. "Evelyn, what's wrong?" She couldn't speak. She just handed him the letter. Cole took it, scanned the contents quickly. It was from her Uncle Harold, forwarded through the general store in town. The words were brief and brutal. "The property and belongings of your late parents have been sold to cover outstanding debts. You are no longer welcome to return to Dusty Hollow. Consider your family obligations terminated. Do not write again." "He sold everything," Evelyn whispered. "My mother's jewelry, my father's books, the quilt my grandmother made." A sob escaped her. "Everything I had left of them, and he sold it all." Cole felt a rage building in his chest, hot and fierce. He wanted to ride to Dusty Hollow and put his fist through Harold Carter's face. He wanted to burn the man's house down around his ears. He wanted to make him pay for every tear Evelyn had ever shed because of his cruelty. But that wouldn't help her, not now. Instead, he set the letter aside and took her hands in his. "Look at me," he said quietly. She raised her tear-stained face to his. "Those things, the jewelry, the books, all of it, they're just objects. They're not your parents. Your parents are here." He touched a finger to her temple. "And here." He moved his hand to rest over her heart. "No one can take that away from you. No one." "But it's all I had." "No." His voice was firm. "It's not all you have. You have this house. You have the life you're building here. You have—" He paused, swallowed hard. "You have me, for whatever that's worth." Evelyn stared at him, her tears slowing. "Cole, I know I'm not much," he continued. "I know this isn't the life you deserved, but I promise you, Evelyn, as long as I'm breathing, you will never be alone again. You will never be thrown away again. This is your home now, for as long as you want it." She was crying again, but differently now. Not with grief, but with something that felt almost like joy. "I don't want to go anywhere," she said. "I don't want to leave. This place, this house, it's more than I ever hoped for, more than I ever dreamed." Cole reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek. His hand lingered there, warm against her skin. "Then stay," he said simply. "Stay forever." And in that moment, kneeling on the floor of a kitchen that had once been empty and cold, holding the hand of a woman he had never expected to love, Cole Maddox felt something shift inside him. The ice that had encased his heart for 4 long years began, at last, to thaw. The winter continued its slow march toward spring, and with each passing day, the bond between Cole and Evelyn deepened. They didn't rush into anything. Both of them were too wounded, too cautious for that. But they allowed themselves to hope, and that hope began to transform them both. Cole started whistling again. It was a small thing, barely noticeable at first. He would be out in the barn, mending a harness or brushing down one of the horses, and suddenly a tune would emerge, something half remembered from his childhood, or one of the songs Sarah used to sing. The first time Evelyn heard it, she froze in the middle of kneading bread, tears springing to her eyes. It was the sound of a man coming back to life. She started finding little gifts around the house, a sprig of dried lavender tucked into her sewing basket, a ribbon, faded but still pretty, left on her pillow, a book of poetry, God knew where he'd found it, placed on the table beside her breakfast plate. "Where did this come from?" she asked, holding up the book. Cole shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "Found it. Thought you might like it." Evelyn pressed the book to her chest, smiling. "I love it." He nodded gruffly and went back to his coffee, but she could see the pleased flush creeping up his neck. They started taking walks together in the evenings when the work was done and the light was soft and golden. The snow was beginning to melt, revealing patches of brown earth and the first tentative shoots of new growth. They would walk the perimeter of the ranch, checking fences and looking for signs of spring, talking about everything and nothing. Cole told her about his dreams, how he'd once wanted to breed horses, build something bigger than a cattle ranch. He told her about the neighbors he'd had before the fever drove everyone away, about the community that had once existed here on the edge of civilization. And Evelyn told him about her dreams too, the home she'd imagined having, the family she'd wanted, the garden she'd planned in her mind, the children she'd hoped to raise. She told him about the shame of being labeled barren, the cruelty of being treated like damaged goods. "They were wrong about you," Cole said one evening, as they stood on a ridge overlooking the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. All of them. They were wrong. Maybe, Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself against the evening chill. Or maybe they were right. I can't give you children, Cole. If this becomes something more... She trailed off, unable to finish. Cole turned to face her. "When I married Sarah, I thought children were the most important thing in the world. I thought my legacy, my future, depended on having sons to carry on after me." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Then I had a son, and I lost him. And I learned that children aren't a legacy. They're a gift that not everyone receives." "But don't you want—" "What I want," Cole interrupted gently, "is to stop being alone. What I want is someone to share this life with, someone to grow old with, someone who makes me want to get up in the morning instead of just going through the motions." He reached out and took her hand. "You do that, Evelyn. You make me want to live again. And if that's all we ever have, it's more than enough." Evelyn felt tears threatening again. It seemed she cried more these days than she had in years, but they were different tears now, cleaner, healing. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "You deserve better," Cole replied. "But I'm what you've got, so we'll just have to make do." A laugh escaped her, sudden and surprising. "Make do. Is that your idea of romance?" "I never claimed to be a poet." "No," she agreed, squeezing his hand. "No, you didn't." They stood there together, watching the sun sink below the horizon, their hands intertwined, their hearts cautiously, tentatively, beginning to beat as one. March arrived with a fury of rain and wind, turning the melting snow into rivers of mud that made travel nearly impossible. Cole and Evelyn found themselves trapped inside more often than not, and the enforced closeness accelerated whatever was growing between them. They started eating their meals side by side instead of across from each other. They started sitting together on the small settee by the fire instead of in separate chairs. They started talking until late in the night, sharing stories and dreams and fears they'd never told anyone else. And one night, in the middle of a storm that shook the house to its foundations, Cole kissed her. It happened without warning. They had been talking about something inconsequential, the garden Evelyn wanted to plant, the seeds she hoped to order from the catalog, when a crack of thunder made her jump. She grabbed his arm instinctively, and when she looked up at him, his face was so close to hers that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "Evelyn," he breathed, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative. Two people who had been hurt too many times to trust in anything easily. But as Evelyn leaned into him, as her hands came up to rest on his chest, it deepened into something more, something real. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were trembling. "I'm sorry," Cole said hoarsely. "I should have asked." "Don't apologize." Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "Please don't apologize. I don't want to rush you. I don't want you to feel—" She stopped him with another kiss, shorter this time, but no less meaningful. "I've been waiting my whole life for someone to look at me the way you do," she said when they separated. "I've been waiting for someone to see me, really see me, and not turn away. You're the first person who ever has." Cole rested his forehead against hers. "Then we're quite a pair, aren't we? Two people nobody else wanted. Two people who found each other." "Yes." He closed his eyes. "Yes, we did." The storm raged on outside, but inside the house, everything was still. Two broken souls had found each other in the wreckage of their lives, and something new was being born. Spring came slowly to the ranch, unfurling in tiny increments, a crocus here, a green shoot there, the gradual softening of the earth after months of frozen hardness. And with the spring came changes that neither Cole nor Evelyn had anticipated. The first change was in Cole himself. The man who had been little more than a ghost when Evelyn arrived, going through the motions of living without really being alive, was transforming before her eyes. He smiled more often now. He laughed, sometimes, a rusty sound that seemed to surprise even him. He started making plans for the future, talking about expanding the herd, building a proper chicken coop, adding a room to the house. "Why would we need another room?" Evelyn asked one evening, genuinely curious. Cole's ears turned red. "I don't know, just thinking ahead. Might be nice to have a proper parlor, somewhere for guests." "We don't have guests." "We might, someday." Evelyn let the matter drop, but she caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Part hope, part fear, part something deeper that made her heart flutter. The second change was in the house itself. Over the winter, Evelyn had done what she could with limited resources. But now that the roads were clearing, Cole made good on his promise to take her to town for supplies. The trip to Millbrook, the nearest settlement, 12 miles to the east, took most of a day, but it was worth it. Evelyn walked through the general store like a child in a candy shop, marveling at bolts of fabric and jars of spices and all the little luxuries she'd been without for months. Cole followed behind her, a bemused expression on his face, carrying her selections without complaint. "You sure you need all this?" he asked, eyeing the growing pile. "Need? No. Want? Yes." She held up a length of blue calico. "This would make lovely curtains for the front room. And this, she added a packet of seeds to the pile, is for the garden. Tomatoes, beans, squash, everything we'll need to be self-sufficient by fall." "We're already self-sufficient." "More self-sufficient, then." Cole shook his head, but he was smiling. "Whatever makes you happy." Evelyn paused, the fabric still in her hands. "You do," she said quietly. "You make me happy." The words hung in the air between them, simple and true. Cole's smile faded into something more serious. "Then we'd better get married," he said, "because I intend to keep making you happy for a very long time." Evelyn stared at him. "What?" "Marry me." His voice was gruff but steady. "I know this isn't the proper way to do it. No ring, no fancy speech, standing in the middle of the general store with half the town probably listening in." He glanced around. Sure enough, several other customers were watching with undisguised curiosity. "But I've never been much for proper, and I don't want to waste another day pretending we're something we're not." "Cole, I love you, Evelyn. I didn't think I'd ever say those words again, but there it is. I love you, and I want you to be my wife. For real, this time. Not just a lie we told to survive." Evelyn felt the tears coming again, those clean, healing tears that had become so familiar lately. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you." She laughed, the sound watery but joyful. Yes, you impossible man, I'll marry you. Cole whooped, actually whooped, a sound Evelyn wouldn't have believed he was capable of making, and swept her into his arms, spinning her around right there in the middle of the general store. The other customers burst into applause, and somewhere in the back, someone called out for a round of drinks at the saloon to celebrate. I don't have a ring, Cole said when he finally set her down. I'll get you one. I'll ride to the city if I have to. I don't need a ring. Evelyn touched his face, marveling at how different it looked now than it had 6 months ago. Softer. Younger. Alive. I just need you. They were married 2 weeks later, in a small ceremony conducted by the traveling preacher who had sheltered in their home during the blizzard. Jonathan Gibson had agreed to return for the occasion, bringing his mother as a witness. It seems fitting, he said as he opened his Bible in front of their fireplace. You showed us kindness when we needed it most. It's an honor to return the favor. The ceremony was simple. No flowers, no music, no guests except Mrs. Gibson and old Samuel, who had driven out from Dusty Hollow despite his wife's objections. Someone ought to be there to represent the place, he'd muttered, even if the place doesn't deserve it. Evelyn wore the blue calico she'd bought at the general store, hastily sewn into a dress in the days before the wedding. Cole wore his cleanest work clothes, his beard trimmed and his hair combed for the first time in what looked like years. Do you, Cole Maddox, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. Cole's voice was steady, his eyes never leaving Evelyn's face. And do you, Evelyn Carter, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. The words came out stronger than she'd expected, filled with a certainty she hadn't known she possessed. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Cole, you may kiss your bride. And he did, a kiss that was gentle and fierce and full of promise, while Mrs. Gibson dabbed at her eyes and Samuel cleared his throat gruffly. Well then, the old man said when they finally separated, I suppose I'll have some news to share when I get back to Dusty Hollow. Tell them whatever you like, Evelyn said, her hand wrapped firmly in Cole's. It doesn't matter anymore. And it didn't. The people who had sent her away as a joke, who had expected her to fail and suffer, who had written her off as worthless, they were part of a life she had left behind. What mattered now was this house, this man, this future they would build together. The cruel joke had become something beautiful. The barren woman and the broken widower had found each other, and in finding each other, they had found themselves. As Samuel's wagon disappeared down the road, and the preacher and his mother settled in for a night's rest before their own journey, Cole and Evelyn stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over their land. Mrs. Maddox, Cole said, testing the words. Mr. Maddox, Evelyn replied, smiling, has a nice ring to it. It does. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they watched the colors fade from the sky. I never thought I'd feel this way again, he murmured into her hair. After Sarah, after Daniel, I never thought I'd want to. And now? Now I can't imagine feeling any other way. Evelyn turned in his arms, looking up at his face, this face that had been so closed and cold when she first arrived, now open and warm and full of love. Whatever comes, she said, we'll face it together. Together, he agreed. They stood there until the stars came out, two people who had been broken by life and healed by love, ready to face whatever the future might bring. The months that followed were the happiest of Evelyn's life. Spring blossomed into summer, and the ranch came alive with color and growth. The garden she had planned all winter flourished beyond her wildest expectations. Tomatoes and beans, squash and peppers, herbs and flowers. The cattle thrived. The house, once so empty and cold, rang with laughter and conversation and the simple sounds of two people living a shared life. Cole continued to change, the transformation so gradual that it was almost imperceptible day to day, but startling when she thought back to the man she had first met. He smiled easily now. He talked about the future without the shadow of grief darkening his eyes. He even started building that extra room he had mentioned, working on it in the evenings after his other chores were done. "What's it for?" Evelyn asked again, watching him hammer boards into place. "Just something I want to do," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "A man needs a project." She let it go, but she noticed the way he looked at the growing structure sometimes, his expression thoughtful and a little wistful. Summer stretched on, hot and golden. They fell into routines that felt less like obligations and more like rituals, comfortable and comforting. Morning coffee together on the porch, evening walks around the property, long conversations by the fire after dark, and beneath it all, a current of contentment that Evelyn had never known before. A sense that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to do. One evening in late July, as they sat together watching the sun set over the fields, Cole reached over and took her hand. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what?" "About us. About our future." He paused, gathering his words. "I know what the doctors told you, about children, and I meant what I said. It doesn't change how I feel about you, but I've been wondering—" Evelyn's heart clenched. "Wondering what?" "There are other ways to have a family. Other children who need homes." He squeezed her hand. If you ever wanted to consider adoption?" The word felt strange on her tongue, foreign and yet somehow familiar. She had thought about it before, in the dark years after the diagnosis. She had dreamed of it, even. But she had never dared to hope it might actually be possible. "There are orphanages in the cities," Cole continued. "Children whose parents died of fever or accident or just couldn't care for them anymore. Children who need love, just like—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Just like we do." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, processing the offer. Then she turned to face him, her eyes bright with tears that were becoming so familiar. "You would do that?" she asked. "Take in someone else's child, raise them as your own?" "Our own," Cole corrected gently. "They would be our own. Blood doesn't make a family, Evelyn. Love does." He touched her face. "And we have plenty of that." She threw her arms around him, holding him tight. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want that. I want a family with you. However we have to build it." Cole held her close, and over her shoulder he looked at the half-built room attached to the house. The room that had always been meant for this moment, this possibility. "Then we'll build it," he said. "Together." It was August when the world delivered something neither of them had expected. The day started like any other. Cole rose early to tend the cattle, and Evelyn spent the morning in the garden, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables. The heat was oppressive, thick and heavy, the kind that made every movement feel like wading through water. By late afternoon, clouds had begun to gather on the horizon, not the gentle white clouds of fair weather, but dark, bruised masses that promised a storm. Cole came in early, eyeing the sky with the practiced wariness of a man who had lived his whole life at the mercy of the weather. "Big one coming," he said, stomping the dust from his boots. "We should bring the animals in." They worked together, driving the cattle into the barn, securing the chickens in their coop, making sure everything was tied down and battened tight. By the time they finished, the first drops of rain were beginning to fall, and the wind was picking up, whipping Evelyn's hair into her face. They made it inside just as the sky opened up. The storm was ferocious, thunder so loud it shook the walls, lightning that turned the night into day. The rain came down in sheets, horizontal and punishing. Cole built up the fire while Evelyn heated water for tea, both of them moving with the easy coordination of two people who had learned to work together. "This might be the worst one yet," Evelyn said, peering out the window at the chaos beyond. "We'll be fine. House is solid. We're prepared." And they were. They had learned from the blizzard, had made sure they would never be caught off guard again. The pantry was stocked. The firewood was dry. They had everything they needed to wait out whatever nature threw at them. But nature wasn't the only thing that would arrive at their door that night. The knock came around midnight. Cole and Evelyn had been sitting by the fire, neither of them able to sleep with the storm raging outside. When they heard the pounding at the door, both of them froze. "Who could be out in this?" Evelyn whispered. Cole grabbed his rifle and crossed to the door. "Who's there?" "Please." A woman's voice, weak and desperate. "Please, help us!" Cole opened the door. A young woman collapsed across the threshold, soaked to the bone, her face pale as death. In her arms, wrapped in a sodden blanket, was a baby. "God Almighty," Cole breathed. He scooped the woman up, carried her to the settee by the fire. Evelyn rushed to help, grabbing blankets, stoking the flames, trying to warm them both. The woman was barely conscious, her body racked with violent shivers. The baby, miraculously, was silent, eyes open, watching everything with the calm curiosity of infants. "What happened?" Evelyn asked, gently prying the baby from the woman's arms. "Who are you?" "My name is—" The woman coughed, a terrible rattling sound. Clara Wells. I was traveling. My husband died. Fever, 3 days ago. I had to keep going, had to find somewhere safe for—" Her eyes, fever bright, fixed on the baby in Evelyn's arms. "My son," she whispered. "His name is Thomas. He's all I have left." "You're safe now," Cole said, kneeling beside her. "Both of you. We'll take care of you." But even as he said it, Evelyn could see the truth in the woman's eyes. The fever that had taken her husband had her now too. She had pushed through on sheer will, determined to find shelter for her child, but her body was giving out. "I need you to promise me something," Clara said, her voice fading. Her hand found Evelyn's, gripping with surprising strength. "Promise me you'll take care of him, raise him, love him." "We'll take you to a doctor," Evelyn said desperately. "In the morning, when the storm clears—" "There's no time." Clara's eyes were clear suddenly, with the terrible clarity of someone who knows exactly what's coming. "I can feel it. I don't have long, but I can go in peace if I know he'll be loved." Evelyn looked at Cole. He looked back at her, and in that moment, they both understood. This was the answer to a prayer neither of them had dared to speak aloud. This was the family they had dreamed of, delivered to their door in the middle of a storm. "We promise," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "We'll raise him as our own. We'll love him as our own. He'll never want for anything." Clara smiled, a beautiful, peaceful smile that transformed her pale, sick face into something radiant. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." She closed her eyes, her breathing slowed. And just before dawn, with the storm still raging outside and her son sleeping peacefully in Evelyn's arms, Clara Wells slipped away. They buried her in the morning, in a spot overlooking the valley, next to the graves of Sarah and Daniel Maddox. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling in the early light. Cole dug the grave while Evelyn held the baby, both of them silent with the weight of what had happened. "She must have traveled miles in that storm," Cole said, driving the shovel into the earth, dying on her feet, all to make sure her son was safe. "A mother's love," Evelyn murmured, looking down at the tiny face in her arms. "The most powerful force in the world." When the grave was filled and the simple wooden cross planted, they stood together in silence. "Thomas," Evelyn said softly. "That's what she called him. Thomas." Cole nodded. "It's a good name. Strong. Thomas Maddox." The words felt right in her mouth. Natural. Our son," Cole agreed. They walked back to the house together, the three of them, a family formed in the most unlikely of circumstances. The baby, Thomas, cooed in Evelyn's arms, reaching up to touch her face with tiny fingers. And despite the grief of the morning, despite the tragedy that had brought them together, Evelyn felt something bloom in her chest. Something warm and fierce and all-consuming. Love. She had thought, after everything that had happened, that she knew what love was. She had loved Cole, had grown to love him with a depth that still surprised her. She had loved her parents, had loved the idea of the family she might never have. But this tiny person in her arms, this helpless child who had been entrusted to her care, this was something else entirely. This was a love that would move mountains, that would defy armies, that would burn down the world if necessary. This was motherhood, and it had found her at last. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and fumbling attempts at childcare. Neither Cole nor Evelyn had experience with infants. Cole had barely been present for Daniel's early months, consumed with work as he had been. and Evelyn had never held a baby for more than a few minutes in her entire life. They learned by doing, making mistakes and fixing them, laughing at their own ineptitude even as exhaustion wore them thin. Thomas, for his part, seemed remarkably patient with his new parents. He cried when he was hungry, slept when he was tired, and watched them with those calm, curious eyes that seemed to take in everything. "He's an easy baby," Cole observed one morning, watching Evelyn feed him from a bottle. "I don't remember Daniel being this peaceful." "Maybe he knows we need the practice," Evelyn replied, smiling. The room Cole had been building took on new urgency. He worked on it every spare moment, finishing the walls, installing a window, building a cradle from scratch. By the time the first frost came, it was complete. A cozy nursery attached to the main house, warm and bright and perfect for a growing child. "It's beautiful," Evelyn said, standing in the doorway with Thomas in her arms. "You built this for him." "I built it for us," Cole corrected. "For our family." The word, family, still felt new, still felt miraculous. But it was becoming more real with each passing day, each shared meal, each sleepless night, each moment of joy and frustration and overwhelming love. They were a family. Against all odds, against all expectations, they had become what neither of them had dared to hope for. And the world, for a little while at least, seemed determined to let them be happy. But happiness, as Evelyn knew all too well, was a fragile thing. And the shadows that would threaten it were already gathering just beyond the horizon, waiting for their moment to strike. News traveled slowly to the ranch, but it traveled nonetheless. And the news that eventually reached Dusty Hollow was explosive enough to find its way even to the isolated homestead where Cole and Evelyn were building their new life. The barren woman had a baby. The whispers started small, as whispers always do. Samuel mentioned it to his wife, who mentioned it to Mrs. Henderson at the dress shop, who mentioned it to anyone who would listen. Within a week, the whole town was buzzing with the scandal. "Impossible," declared Thomas Whitmore when he heard. "The doctor said she couldn't have children. She must have gotten it somewhere else." "Maybe she was lying all along," suggested one of his friends. "Maybe she was never barren at all. Maybe she just wanted out of the engagement." "Or maybe she found it by the side of the road," said another. "You know those people out there, living like savages? Who knows what they get up to?" The speculation grew wilder with each retelling. Some said Evelyn had stolen the baby from a passing wagon train. Others claimed she had given birth to it herself, proving that her barrenness had been a lie all along. A few even whispered that the child was somehow supernatural, a changeling left by spirits to torment the righteous. None of them considered the truth, that a dying mother had entrusted her child to two strangers, that love had formed where blood had not, that family could be built from something other than genetics. For months, the gossip remained just that, gossip. Cole and Evelyn, isolated on their ranch, knew nothing of it. They were too busy with the daily demands of raising a child, of running a homestead, of building a life together. But gossip has a way of finding its target eventually, and it would find them, sooner than anyone expected, in the most devastating way possible. The letter arrived in late October, carried by a courier who had ridden all the way from Denver. Cole accepted it with a frown. They rarely received mail, and never from so far away, and carried it inside to read. Evelyn was in the nursery, rocking Thomas to sleep. She heard Cole's footsteps stop in the kitchen, heard the rustle of paper, heard the sudden sharp intake of breath. "Cole?" She set Thomas in his cradle carefully and went to the kitchen. "What is it?" Cole stood at the table, the letter in his hands, his face drained of color. "There's a man," he said slowly. "A man named Nathaniel Drayton. He claims—" Cole stopped, swallowed hard. "He claims Thomas is his son." The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "What? That's impossible. Clara said her husband died of fever. She said her husband." Cole's voice was grim. Maybe that wasn't the whole truth. He handed her the letter. Evelyn read it with growing horror. The letter was from a lawyer in Denver, writing on behalf of one Nathaniel Drayton of Boston. It alleged that the child known as Thomas, currently in the custody of Cole and Evelyn Maddox, was in fact the legitimate heir of Mr. Drayton, conceived during a brief liaison with one Clara Wells, now deceased. Mr. Drayton was demanding the immediate return of his son. If his demands were not met, the letter concluded, Mr. Drayton would be forced to pursue the matter through legal channels. "This can't be right," Evelyn whispered. "Clara made me promise. She wanted us to raise him. What she wanted doesn't matter, legally." Cole's voice was harsh, but Evelyn could hear the fear beneath it. If this man can prove paternity, if he has the money for lawyers and courts, we could lose him, Evelyn. We could lose our son. Evelyn looked at the nursery door, behind which Thomas was sleeping peacefully, unaware that his whole world was about to be turned upside down. "No," she said, and her voice was steel. "No, we won't. I don't care who this man is or how much money he has. Thomas is our son. Clara gave him to us, and I will burn this world to the ground before I let anyone take him away." Cole looked at her, this woman who had come to him broken and beaten and had somehow grown into the fiercest person he had ever known. "Then we fight," he said. "Whatever it takes, we fight." Evelyn nodded, her jaw set, her eyes blazing. The battle for their son had begun. The days following the letter's arrival were the darkest Evelyn had known since leaving Dusty Hollow. She moved through them in a fog of fear and determination, caring for Thomas with a fierce tenderness that bordered on desperation, as if every moment might be their last together. Cole threw himself into action. He rode to Millbrook to consult with the only lawyer in the region, a weathered man named Harrison Blackwood, who had practiced law on the frontier for 30 years. Blackwood read the letter 3 times, his brow furrowing deeper with each pass. "This Drayton fellow has resources," Blackwood said finally, setting the letter down on his cluttered desk. "A Boston address, a Denver lawyer handling his affairs out here. That means money. And in my experience, money has a way of making courts see things a certain way." "What are our options?" Cole asked, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. "Depends on what he can prove." Blackwood leaned back in his chair. "If he can establish that the child is biologically his, and if there's no legal documentation showing the mother transferred custody to you, then he has a case, a strong one. Clara was dying. There wasn't time for legal documentation. She made us promise. A deathbed promise won't hold up in court without witnesses." Cole felt his heart sink. There were no witnesses. Just me and my wife. Blackwood nodded slowly, his expression sympathetic. "I'm not saying you'll lose. I'm saying it won't be easy. This man, whoever he is, clearly wants the child badly enough to spend considerable money pursuing him. We need to find out why." "Why does it matter why?" "Because in my experience, when a man goes to this much trouble for a child he's never met, there's usually something more at stake than paternal affection." Blackwood stood, crossing to the window of his small office. "Find out who Nathaniel Drayton really is. Find out what he wants. That's where we start." Cole returned home that night to find Evelyn sitting in the nursery, Thomas asleep in her arms. She hadn't moved in hours, he could tell. Her dress was wrinkled, her hair coming loose from its pins, her eyes red from crying. "What did the lawyer say?" she asked, not looking up. Cole knelt beside her chair, one hand coming to rest on her knee. "He said we need to find out more about Drayton, find out who he is and what he really wants." "I know what he wants. He wants our son. But why? He's never met Thomas. He didn't care enough about Clara to marry her. Why pursue this now?" Evelyn finally looked at him, and her eyes were hollow with fear. "Does it matter? He has money. He has lawyers. We have nothing." "We have each other." Cole's voice was firm. "We have the truth, and we have people who will stand with us. The travelers from the blizzard, Samuel and Mary, the preacher and his mother, they saw what kind of people we are. They can testify to our character." "Character won't matter if the law says he's the father. Then we make sure the law sees the whole picture." Cole took her hand, squeezed it tight. "We don't give up, Evelyn. Not ever. That's not who we are." She looked at him for a long moment, this man who had been as broken as she was when they first met, who had somehow become her rock, her anchor, her strength. "No," she said finally, and her voice was steadier now. "That's not who we are." The first letter from Drayton's lawyer was followed by a second, and then a third, each more insistent than the last. The tone progressed from polite request to firm demand to thinly veiled threat. Cole and Evelyn read each one together, their fear growing with every word. Then, in early November, Nathaniel Drayton himself arrived. He came without warning, his carriage rolling up the dirt road to the ranch on a gray afternoon when the clouds hung low and heavy. Cole was in the barn when he heard the wheels, and he emerged to find a man stepping down from the finest vehicle he had ever seen. Black lacquered wood, brass fittings, pulled by a matched pair of bay horses that probably cost more than the entire Maddox ranch. The man himself was equally polished, tall and handsome in a cold, calculated way, dressed in a suit that screamed Eastern money, with hair slicked back and a thin mustache that gave him the look of a snake pretending to be human. He surveyed the ranch with undisguised contempt, as if the dirt itself offended him. "Mr. Maddox, I presume?" His voice was smooth, cultured, dripping with false friendliness. "Nathaniel Drayton. I believe you've been expecting me." Cole's jaw tightened. "I've been expecting nothing but trouble from you, Mr. Drayton." "Ah, direct. I appreciate that in a man." Drayton smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then let me be equally direct. I've come for my son." "You don't have a son here. The child you call Thomas. He's mine. His mother was, well, let's say she was a brief indulgence, a mistake, really. But the boy is my blood, and I intend to claim him." The front door opened, and Evelyn stepped onto the porch. She had heard the carriage, had watched from the window as this stranger climbed down and confronted her husband. Now she stood with her spine straight and her chin high, every inch of her radiating defiance. "You can claim nothing here," she said coldly. "Thomas is our son. His mother gave him to us. Whatever you think you're entitled to, you're wrong." Drayton turned his snake smile on her. "Ah, the barren bride. I've heard about you." He looked her up and down with insulting deliberation. "The town that sent you here was quite happy to share your story. The damaged goods nobody wanted. The woman who couldn't even fulfill the most basic function of her sex." Cole took a step forward, his hands curling into fists. "You'll keep a civil tongue in your head, or I'll cut it out for you." "Easy, Mr. Maddox. I meant no offense." Drayton's tone made it clear he meant every offense. "I'm simply observing that it must have seemed like quite the miracle, having a child fall into your lap. A ready-made family for two people who could never have one on their own." "Get off my land," Evelyn said, her voice like ice. "I'll leave. For now." Drayton pulled on his gloves, taking his time. "But I'll be back. With the sheriff, if necessary. With a court order, if it comes to that. That child is my heir, Mrs. Maddox. My only male heir. And I will have him." He turned back to Cole, and something flickered in his eyes. Something cruel and calculating. "I'm prepared to be generous," he said. $500 for your trouble. Sign the boy over to me and you'll never hear from me again. You can go back to your quiet little life, just the two of you, the way it was meant to be." $500. It was more money than Cole had seen in his entire life. More than enough to expand the ranch, to secure their future, to live comfortably for years. "Get out," Cole said. Drayton's smile faded. "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake I ever made was opening that door. Now leave, before I forget I'm a civilized man." For a moment, something ugly crossed Drayton's face, a flash of genuine malice that revealed the man beneath the polished exterior. Then the mask was back in place, smooth and unreadable. "Very well, but remember, I offered you an easy way out." He climbed back into his carriage, pausing at the door. "The hard way is going to be much more unpleasant. For everyone." The carriage rolled away, disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust. Cole and Evelyn stood together on the porch, watching until it was gone. Then Evelyn's composure finally cracked, and she began to shake. "He's going to take him," she whispered. "Cole, he's going to take our son." Cole pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "No, he's not. I swear to you, Evelyn, on everything I am, that man will never touch our boy." Inside the house, Thomas began to cry, as if sensing the darkness that had just passed through their lives. The weeks that followed were a waking nightmare. Drayton made good on his threats, filing a formal custody claim with the territorial court. Papers arrived demanding that Cole and Evelyn appear before a judge, demanding proof of their claim to the child, demanding documentation they didn't have. Harrison Blackwood worked tirelessly on their behalf, but even he admitted the odds were not in their favor. Drayton has connections, he told them during one of their many meetings. He knows people in Denver, in Washington. He's pulling strings I can't even see. What about the witnesses? Evelyn asked. The travelers we saved during the blizzard? Surely their testimony matters. It helps establish your character, yes, but character isn't the issue here. The issue is parentage, and unless we can prove that Clara Wells legally transferred custody to you, Drayton's claim as biological father takes precedence. But she did transfer custody. She begged us to take him. She made us promise. I believe you. The court will believe you. But without documentation, without witnesses to that specific conversation, it's your word against Drayton's lawyers. Blackwood sighed. And he has a lot of lawyers. Cole slammed his fist on the table. So we're supposed to just hand our son over to that snake because he has more money than us? No, we fight. We gather every piece of evidence we can find. We bring in every witness willing to testify, and we make the strongest case possible. Blackwood leaned forward. I told you before. Find out who Drayton really is. Find out why he wants this child so badly. There's something he's not telling us, and if we can find it, we might just have a chance. The investigation began. Cole rode to Denver, a journey of several days, to dig into Drayton's background. What he found was disturbing but incomplete. A wealthy man from an old Boston family, involved in shipping and real estate, known for his ruthlessness in business and his coldness in personal matters. He had been married once to a woman from another prominent family, but they had no children. His wife rarely appeared in public, and rumor had it that she spent most of her time at a sanitarium in the countryside. Why would a man like that care about a child from a brief affair? Cole asked Blackwood when he returned. That's the question, isn't it? Blackwood drummed his fingers on his desk. A man with that much money, that much pride, he wouldn't go to this much trouble for sentiment. There has to be something else. Evelyn, meanwhile, was conducting her own investigation. She wrote letters to churches in the towns Clara might have passed through, to the registrar's office in Denver, where Clara's husband had supposedly died, to anyone who might have information about the young woman who had stumbled onto their porch that terrible night. Most of her letters went unanswered, but one, sent to a small church in a mining town called Silver Creek, returned with something unexpected. The pastor, a man named Father Michael O'Brien, wrote that he remembered Clara Wells. She had stayed in his parish for several weeks the previous spring, working as a housekeeper for a local family while she figured out what to do next. She had been pregnant then, he said, and deeply troubled. She told me she was running from someone, Father O'Brien wrote. A man who had used her and discarded her, who she feared would come for the child when it was born. She said he was powerful and dangerous, that he had threatened her life if she didn't give him what he wanted. I urged her to go to the authorities, but she refused. She said the authorities would never believe her word against his. The letter continued. I don't know what happened to her after she left Silver Creek, but I remember her face, Mrs. Maddox. I remember the fear in her eyes. Whatever this man did to her, she believed it was worth dying to escape. Evelyn read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling. Clara hadn't just been running from a failed relationship. She had been running from Drayton himself. He had threatened her, pursued her, and now he was pursuing her child. He doesn't want Thomas because he loves him, Evelyn said to Cole that night, the letter spread between them on the kitchen table. He wants him because Thomas is something he can use, some kind of asset. But what kind of asset? The man has money, connections, everything he could want. Maybe not everything. Evelyn's mind was racing. Blackwood said he's been married for years with no children. What if there's something about his inheritance, his family's money, that requires an heir? What if Thomas isn't just a child to him? He's a means to an end? Cole stared at her. You think he'd take a child he doesn't love just to secure an inheritance? I think men like Drayton are capable of anything. The question was how to prove it. The court date was set for December 15th, just 6 weeks away. As the days ticked down, Cole and Evelyn scrambled to build their case, gathering witnesses and documentation, trying to piece together the truth about Nathaniel Drayton. The travelers from the blizzard came through, every one of them. Samuel and Mary made the long journey from California, where they had settled after their wagon was repaired. Jonathan Gibson and his mother traveled from their new parish in Kansas. Even old Samuel from Dusty Hollow came, despite the disapproval of his wife and neighbors. "You folks saved our lives," Samuel the traveler said when he arrived at the ranch with Mary. "Opened your door in the middle of a storm, took us in, fed us, kept us warm. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of parents you are." Mary nodded, her eyes bright with tears. "When we heard what was happening, we knew we had to come. Whatever we can do to help, we'll do it." Dr. Whitfield from Millbrook agreed to testify as well. He had examined Thomas when the child was first brought to them, had treated the fever that Clara had passed to her son in those last terrible days. He could speak to the condition the child was in, to the love and care that had brought him back to health. "That baby was half dead when you brought him to me," Dr. Whitfield said. "Malnourished, sick, cold to the touch. If you hadn't cared for him the way you did, he wouldn't have survived the week. That's not something a person does for a child they don't love." Reverend Gibson offered something even more valuable, a written statement from a colleague in Boston who had made discreet inquiries about Drayton's family. "It's as you suspected," he told Cole and Evelyn. "Drayton's inheritance is tied to producing a male heir. His father's will was very specific. If Nathaniel dies without a son, the entire estate passes to a cousin he despises. He's been trying for years to produce an heir with his wife, but she's been unable to carry a child to term. The doctors say it's unlikely she ever will. So he needs Thomas to inherit his fortune," Evelyn said slowly. "Exactly. The child isn't a son to him. He's a solution to a problem, a means of satisfying a legal requirement." Cole's face darkened. "He doesn't love that boy at all. I doubt Nathaniel Drayton has ever loved anything except money and power." The picture was becoming clearer. Drayton didn't want Thomas because of any paternal feeling. He wanted him because the child represented millions of dollars that would otherwise slip through his fingers. He had used Clara, discarded her, and when she had fled to protect her unborn child, he had waited until she was dead to make his claim. It was monstrous. It was calculated. And it was exactly the kind of thing Cole and Evelyn needed to expose. But exposing it was one thing. Proving it in a court of law was another. "The evidence is circumstantial," Blackwood warned them, reviewing the case 2 weeks before the hearing. "We can show motive, the inheritance issue, and we can show character through the testimony of your witnesses. But Drayton's lawyers will argue that none of this changes the fundamental question of parentage. If he can prove he's the biological father, his claim takes precedence. Even if he only wants Thomas for the money? The law doesn't care about motivation. It cares about rights. And as the biological father, Drayton has rights." Evelyn felt despair closing in around her. "So it doesn't matter that Clara wanted us to raise him. It doesn't matter that we love him. It doesn't matter that Drayton would treat him like property instead of a person." "I didn't say it doesn't matter. I said it's not enough on its own to win the case." Blackwood paused, thinking, "We need something more. Something that proves Drayton unfit, or something that establishes your legal claim beyond the deathbed promise. Without one or the other, I can't guarantee we'll win." Cole and Evelyn rode home in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them like a physical force. That night, lying in bed with Thomas asleep in the nursery next door, Evelyn finally gave voice to the fear that had been growing in her heart for weeks. "What if we lose?" Cole was silent for a long moment. "We won't. But what if we do? What if the judge decides that blood matters more than love? What if Drayton takes Thomas and raises him to be just like himself, cold and cruel and caring about nothing but money? Then I'll burn down his house with him in it." Evelyn turned to look at her husband. In the moonlight streaming through the window, his face was hard as stone. "I mean it," he said. "I've lost one family, Evelyn. I won't lose another. If the law won't protect our son, then I'll protect him myself. Whatever it takes. Even if it means breaking the law? Even if it means breaking every law ever written." She reached out, took his hand. "I love you, Cole Maddox. I love you too." He squeezed her fingers. "And I love that boy in there. And no man, no judge, no lawyer, no snake in a fancy suit is going to take him away from us." They lay there in the darkness, holding hands, listening to the sound of their son breathing in the next room. The court date drew closer, and the Maddox family prepared for war. The breakthrough came 3 days before the hearing from the most unexpected source. A woman arrived at the ranch in a hired carriage, dressed in clothing that spoke of wealth, but with a face that spoke of suffering. She was thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous tremor in her hands. "Mrs. Maddox?" she asked when Evelyn answered the door. "My name is Catherine Drayton. I'm Nathaniel's wife." Evelyn stared at her, too shocked to speak. "Please," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've come a very long way. May I come in?" Evelyn stepped aside, and the woman entered. Cole was in the barn when Evelyn sent for him. He came into the house with his hackles raised, ready for confrontation, but stopped short when he saw the frail figure sitting at his kitchen table. "This is Catherine Drayton," Evelyn said, "Nathaniel's wife." Cole's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" "I want to help you." Catherine's hands were shaking as she lifted a cup of tea that Evelyn had given her. "I know what my husband is doing. I know why he wants the child, and I know things about him that could destroy his case. Why would you help us?" Catherine looked at him, and her eyes were full of a pain so deep it made Cole's breath catch. "Because I hate him," she said simply. "Because he's made my life a living hell for 15 years. Because every day I spend in that house, I die a little more." She set down the cup, straightened her spine. "And because that boy in the other room deserves a chance at happiness that I never had." She told them everything. She told them about Drayton's obsession with producing an heir, how he had blamed her for their childlessness, how he had confined her to a sanitarium for months at a time whenever she disappointed him. She told them about his cruelty, his coldness, his complete inability to feel genuine human emotion. And she told them about Clara Wells. "She was a maid in our Boston house," Catherine said. "Young, pretty, alone in the world. Nathaniel took advantage of her, as he's taken advantage of so many others. When she became pregnant, he offered her money to disappear. She took it. She had no choice. But she must have realized what kind of man he was. She ran as far as she could, trying to escape him. But he found out about the child. One of his spies tracked her down. Nathaniel has eyes everywhere. It's how he maintains control." Catherine's voice was bitter. "When he learned she had a son, he saw his opportunity. A male heir, born outside of marriage but still carrying his blood. Someone he could shape into whatever he needed. He doesn't want Thomas as a son," Evelyn said. "He wants him as a tool." "Exactly. The child would be raised by nurses and tutors, kept away from anyone who might encourage him to think for himself. He would inherit the Drayton fortune, yes, but he would also inherit a legacy of cruelty and manipulation. He would become just like Nathaniel." Cole felt sick. "And you're willing to testify to all of this?" "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to stop him." Catherine met his eyes. "I have documents. Letters Nathaniel wrote to his lawyer discussing the inheritance issue, records of payments to the spies who tracked Clara, even a letter from his father's executor confirming the terms of the will. Everything you need to prove that this isn't about love or family. It's about money and power." "Why?" Evelyn asked. "Why risk everything to help us? If Nathaniel finds out, he'll destroy me." Catherine's laugh was hollow. "He's been destroying me for years, Mrs. Maddox. At least this way, it will mean something. At least this way, one child will escape him." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "Everything you need is in here. Use it. Win your case. Win. And raise that boy to be a good man, the kind of man my husband never could be." Evelyn took the envelope with trembling hands. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you." "Win," Catherine said. "That's all the thanks I need." She left that afternoon, disappearing back into the world from which she had come. Cole and Evelyn never saw her again, but the documents she left behind changed everything. The courtroom in Millbrook was standing room only on December 15th. Word had spread about the case, the barren woman and her cowboy husband fighting to keep a child against a wealthy Easterner. It had all the elements of a story people couldn't resist: love against money, frontier grit against Eastern polish, the little people against the powerful. Cole and Evelyn arrived early, dressed in their best clothes, Thomas cradled in Evelyn's arms. The baby was 10 months old now, plump and healthy, his eyes bright with curiosity as he looked around the packed courtroom. Drayton was already there, seated at a table with two expensive-looking lawyers. He looked immaculate as always, but there was a tension around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He had heard about Catherine's visit. His spies had told him, but he didn't know exactly what she had revealed. The uncertainty was eating at him. Harrison Blackwood took his place beside Cole and Evelyn, his weathered face calm but alert. On the bench behind them sat their witnesses, Samuel and Mary, the Gibsons, Dr. Whitfield, old Samuel from Dusty Hollow. A small army of ordinary people, united by gratitude and conviction. The judge, an imposing man named Walter Caldwell, called the court to order. "We are here to determine the custody of the minor child known as Thomas," he announced. "Mr. Drayton claims paternity and seeks to have the child transferred to his care. Mr. and Mrs. Maddox contest this claim, arguing that the child's mother transferred custody to them before her death. We will hear evidence from both sides and render a judgment." Drayton's lead lawyer stood first. He was a silver-tongued man named Percival Hughes, renowned for his courtroom victories, and he made his case with practiced ease. "Your Honor, the facts of this case are simple. My client, Nathaniel Drayton, is the biological father of the child in question. He has resources to provide the boy with the finest education, the best opportunities, a life of privilege and comfort. The Maddoxes, while no doubt well-meaning, are frontier farmers with limited means. The choice is obvious." He called witnesses, doctors who testified about paternity, character witnesses who spoke of Drayton's standing in the Boston community, financial experts who detailed the vast resources available to the child if he were placed in Drayton's care. It was impressive. It was persuasive. And it painted a picture of a wealthy, responsible man simply trying to claim his rightful heir. Then it was Blackwood's turn. He started with the character witnesses. One by one, Samuel and Mary, the Gibsons, Dr. Whitfield, and the others took the stand and told their stories. They spoke of the blizzard, of the strangers who had opened their door in the middle of a deadly storm. They spoke of the devotion they had witnessed, the love that filled the Maddox home, the transformation they had seen in a baby who had arrived half dead and was now thriving. "These are people of character," Blackwood told the court. "People who risk their own safety to help others. People who take in a dying woman and a sick child and nurse them back to health, or, in the mother's case, ease her passing with compassion and dignity. This is not about money or status. This is about the kind of people who should be raising a child." Then he called Evelyn to the stand. She had been dreading this moment for weeks. Public speaking terrified her, and the thought of defending her right to her own son in front of a packed courtroom made her feel sick. But when she took her seat and looked out at the crowd, she saw Cole's face, steady, sure, full of faith in her, and she found her courage. Blackwood led her through the story gently. The night of the storm, Clara's arrival, the promise she had extracted before dying. "Can you tell the court, in your own words, what Clara Wells said to you that night?" Evelyn took a deep breath. She was dying. She knew she was dying, and all she cared about was making sure her son would be safe. Her voice cracked. "She took my hand and she said, 'Please, raise my son.' She begged me. She made me promise, and I promised. I swore to her that I would love him and protect him and raise him as my own. And that's what I've done. That's what I'll keep doing until the day I die." "Did she ever mention the child's father?" "She said her husband had died of fever. But now I understand she was lying, to protect the child. To protect him from—" She looked at Drayton, and her eyes were hard. "From that man." Drayton's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The courtroom was murmuring, the crowd's sympathy clearly shifting toward Evelyn. Then Blackwood played his final card. "Your Honor, I would like to submit into evidence a collection of documents provided by a witness who cannot be present in court, but whose testimony is nonetheless crucial." He handed the envelope to the bailiff, who carried it to the judge. Caldwell opened it, began reading, and his expression grew darker with every page. "These are private communications," Hughes objected. "Obtained illegally. They were provided voluntarily by Mr. Drayton's wife," Blackwood interrupted. "Mrs. Catherine Drayton, who traveled here specifically to ensure the truth was known." The courtroom erupted. Drayton's face went white. "Order!" Judge Caldwell banged his gavel. "I will have order." The noise subsided. Caldwell continued reading. When he finished, he looked at Drayton with something that might have been disgust. Mr. Drayton, these documents suggest that your interest in the child is primarily financial, that you require a male heir to satisfy the terms of your late father's will, that you have pursued this custody claim not out of paternal love, but out of mercenary self-interest. Your Honor, I object. You'll have your chance to respond. But first, I want to hear from Mr. Blackwood. Blackwood stood. Your Honor, these documents prove what we have argued from the beginning. Nathaniel Drayton doesn't want this child as a son. He wants him as an asset, a means of securing an inheritance that would otherwise pass to another branch of his family. He turned to face the crowd, his voice rising. Clara Wells knew what kind of man Drayton was. She fled from him, traveled hundreds of miles, gave birth alone and afraid, all to protect her son from becoming a pawn in this man's schemes. And on her deathbed, she entrusted that child to the Maddoxes, not because they were wealthy, not because they were powerful, but because they were good, because she saw in them the love and devotion that her son deserved. He turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I ask you to consider not just the letter of the law, but its spirit. The purpose of custody law is to protect children, to ensure they are raised in environments where they will be loved and nurtured. Placing Thomas with Nathaniel Drayton would be placing him with a man who sees him as property, not family. It would be a betrayal of everything Clara Wells died to prevent. The courtroom was silent. Even Drayton's lawyers seemed uncertain how to respond. Judge Caldwell sat for a long moment, his brow furrowed, the documents spread before him. Then he spoke. Mr. Hughes, do you have any response to these allegations? Hughes rose, smoothing his jacket. Your Honor, my client denies any improper motivation. He simply wishes to claim his biological son and provide him with the best possible life. And the letters, the payments to investigators, the specific terms of the will requiring a male heir? Hughes hesitated. Those are private family matters that have no bearing on Mr. Drayton's fitness as a parent. I disagree. Caldwell's voice was cold. They have everything to do with fitness. A man who pursues a child for financial gain is not fit to raise that child. A man who drove a woman to flee in terror, who waited until she was dead to make his claim, is not fit to be called a father. He straightened in his seat. But there is more to consider. Mr. Blackwood, you mentioned that Mrs. Catherine Drayton provided these documents voluntarily. Yes, Your Honor. And where is Mrs. Drayton now? I don't know, Your Honor. She left after providing the documents and has not been in contact since. Caldwell nodded slowly. I would like to speak with her before rendering a final judgment. This court will recess for 3 days to allow her to be located. Drayton rose abruptly. Your Honor, this is absurd. My wife is unwell. She has a history of nervous disorders. Whatever she told these people cannot be trusted. That will be for the court to determine. Caldwell banged his gavel. We are adjourned. The 3 days that followed were an agony of waiting. Cole and Evelyn returned to the ranch, unable to do anything but hope. They had no idea where Catherine Drayton had gone, no way to contact her. Their entire case now rested on a woman who might have disappeared forever. What if she doesn't come back? Evelyn asked on the second night, pacing the floor while Thomas slept. Then we've still got everything else. The witnesses, the documents. But the judge wants to hear from her. What if he thinks we fabricated the documents? What if he decides we're lying? He won't. But Cole's voice lacked conviction. On the morning of the 3rd day, they received word. Catherine Drayton had been found. She was in a hotel in Denver, where she had been staying since leaving the ranch. She had agreed to testify. The courtroom was even more crowded when they reconvened. Word of Catherine's appearance had spread, and everyone wanted to see the wife testify against her own husband. She looked worse than before, if that was possible. Thinner, paler, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold the Bible as she was sworn in. But when she took the stand and looked at Drayton, there was something in her eyes that went beyond fear. It was resolve. Mrs. Drayton, Blackwood began gently, can you tell the court about your husband's relationship with Clara Wells? Catherine spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, but every word carried in the silent room. She told them everything. The affair, the pregnancy, The threats Drayton had made when Clara refused to give up the child, the spies he had sent to track her, the cold calculation with which he had waited for her to die before making his claim. "He doesn't love that child," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "He isn't capable of love. All he cares about is the money, the inheritance he'll lose without a male heir. Thomas isn't a son to him. He's a solution to a problem, a means to an end." "And why are you telling us this?" Blackwood asked. "You know what the consequences will be." Catherine looked at her husband, and for the first time there was no fear in her eyes. "Because I've spent 15 years being afraid of him. 15 years letting him control me, manipulate me, destroy me. I'm done." Her voice grew stronger. "That little boy deserves a chance at a real life. A life with parents who love him, not a life as a pawn in my husband's games." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I have lived with Nathaniel Drayton for 15 years. I know what kind of man he is. I know what he's capable of. If you give him that child, you will be condemning an innocent boy to a life of misery. Please, don't let that happen." The courtroom was utterly silent. Drayton rose. "Your Honor, my wife is clearly suffering from her nervous condition. Nothing she says can be taken seriously." "Sit down, Mr. Drayton." Caldwell's voice was like ice. "I've heard enough." He looked at the documents before him, at the witnesses who had testified, at the trembling woman on the stand and the terrified man at the defendant's table. Then he looked at Evelyn, still holding Thomas in her arms. The baby was awake now, watching the proceedings with wide eyes. As if sensing the importance of the moment, he reached out toward Evelyn's face, his tiny fingers brushing her cheek. She caught his hand, pressed it to her lips. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I know I'm not his blood mother. I know I can never replace the woman who gave birth to him. But I love him. I love him more than I've ever loved anything in my life. And I swear to you, I swear on everything I am, I will spend every day of my life making sure he knows how wanted, how cherished, how loved he is." Judge Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I've reached my decision." The courtroom held its breath. "In the matter of custody of the minor child Thomas, I find in favor of the respondents, Cole and Evelyn Maddox." The room exploded. Cheers, gasps, shouts of outrage from Drayton's corner. Cole grabbed Evelyn, pulled her and Thomas into his arms, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Order!" Caldwell banged his gavel. "Order!" The noise subsided. "Mr. Drayton, while I acknowledge that you may be the biological father of this child, I find that your interest in him is not parental, but mercenary. You pursued this custody claim for financial reasons, not out of love or concern for the child's welfare. Furthermore, the testimony of your wife and the documentary evidence presented paint a picture of a man wholly unfit to raise a child." He turned to Cole and Evelyn. "Mr. and Mrs. Maddox, this court finds that you have acted in good faith throughout these proceedings. The testimony of multiple witnesses establishes that you are people of character, that your home is loving and stable, and that you have devoted yourselves to this child's welfare since his arrival." He picked up his gavel. "It is therefore the judgment of this court that Cole and Evelyn Maddox are confirmed as the legal guardians and adoptive parents of the minor child Thomas. This judgment is final and binding." The gavel fell. Court is adjourned. What happened next passed in a blur. People crowding around them, offering congratulations, shaking hands, and slapping backs. Samuel and Mary weeping with joy. The Gibsons leading the crowd in a spontaneous prayer of thanksgiving. And through it all, Evelyn held Thomas close, whispering to him, telling him that everything was going to be all right, that he was safe, that he was loved, that he was theirs, their son, forever. Cole found her in the hallway outside the courtroom, away from the crowd, her face buried in Thomas's hair. "It's over," he said softly. "Is it?" She looked up at him. "What about Drayton? He won't give up. Men like him never give up." He lost, publicly, spectacularly. His wife testified against him. His secrets are exposed. Cole shook his head. "He's ruined. Whatever he was, whatever power he had, it's gone now. He has nothing left. He still has money. Money won't help him. Not after this." Evelyn wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the nightmare was truly over, that their family was safe, that they could finally move forward without fear. But she had learned, in her 25 years of life, that happy endings were fragile things, that the world had a way of taking back whatever it gave. So she held her son close and she prayed. And for now, at least, her prayers were answered. They walked out of the courthouse together, the Maddox family, Cole and Evelyn and Thomas, into the pale winter sunlight. The crowd parted before them, cheering. Someone threw a hat in the air. At the bottom of the steps, Cole paused. He looked at his wife, at the child in her arms, at the future stretching out before them. "Let's go home," he said. Evelyn smiled, a real smile, the first in weeks. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." And they did. The ride home from Millbrook felt different than any journey they had taken before. The winter air was cold and sharp, cutting through their coats and scarves, but neither Cole nor Evelyn noticed. They were wrapped in something warmer than any blanket, the glow of victory, the relief of survival, the bone-deep certainty that their family was finally, truly safe. Thomas slept in Evelyn's arms, bundled in the quilt she had sewn for him during those first frantic weeks after his arrival. His breathing was soft and steady, his face peaceful. He had no idea what had just happened, no understanding of the battle that had been fought for his future. All he knew was that he was warm and fed and held by the people who loved him. That was enough. That was everything. Cole drove the wagon in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the ones that had characterized their early days together. This was the silence of contentment, of two people who had been through fire and come out forged into something stronger. "What are you thinking?" Evelyn asked finally, as the ranch came into view on the horizon. Cole considered the question. "I'm thinking that a year ago I was ready to die. I was going through the motions, feeding cattle, mending fences, eating meals I couldn't taste, but I wasn't really living. I was just waiting for it to be over. And now?" He turned to look at her, and his eyes were bright with something she hadn't seen in them before. Not just love, though that was there. Something deeper, something like hope. "Now I can't wait to see what happens next." Evelyn smiled, leaning into him, Thomas cradled between them. "Neither can I." The ranch welcomed them back like an old friend. The house stood solid against the winter sky, smoke still curling from the chimney where they had banked the fire before leaving. The cattle lowed in the barn. The chickens scratched in their coop. Everything was exactly as they had left it, and yet everything was different. They were a family now, legally, officially, irrevocably. Nothing could take that away from them. The days that followed were quiet ones, filled with the ordinary rhythms of ranch life. Cole tended the animals, repaired fences damaged by the winter storms, began planning for the spring planting. Evelyn cooked and cleaned and cared for Thomas, watching him grow stronger and more curious with each passing day. But beneath the surface of their peaceful existence, ripples were spreading. News of the trial had traveled far beyond Millbrook. The story of the barren woman and the broken cowboy. Their battle against the wealthy Easterner, their triumph in the face of impossible odds. It captured the imagination of the frontier in a way that few stories did. Newspapers picked it up. Preachers mentioned it in sermons. Travelers passed it along in saloons and general stores, each retelling adding new embellishments until the truth became indistinguishable from legend. And in Dusty Hollow, the town that had sent Evelyn away as a joke, the news landed like a thunderbolt. "Did you hear?" Mrs. Henderson said to anyone who would listen. "The Carter girl won. She kept the baby. That rich man from Boston lost everything." "Impossible," Thomas Whitmore scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "She was barren. The doctors said so." "The baby wasn't hers by blood, you fool. Some dying woman gave it to her. And now the courts say she's the legal mother." Whitmore fell silent, processing this information. The woman he had discarded, the woman he had helped send into exile, had somehow emerged triumphant. She had found a husband, built a family, won a legal battle against a man with more money than God. She had won, and he had been left behind, still unmarried, still working his father's failing farm, still the subject of whispers about the engagement he had broken for reasons that now seemed petty and cruel. Well, he said finally, good for her, I suppose. But his voice was hollow, and everyone who heard it knew he didn't mean a word. The first visitor from Dusty Hollow arrived in late January. Evelyn was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, Thomas playing at her feet when she heard the wagon approaching. She shaded her eyes against the winter sun, trying to make out the driver. When she recognized the face, she felt her stomach drop. It was her cousin Margaret, Harold Carter's daughter. They had never been close. Margaret had always treated Evelyn with the same cold dismissal as her father, but there she was, driving up to the ranch like they were old friends. "Evelyn!" Margaret called, climbing down from the wagon with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Look at you. And is that the baby? Oh, how precious!" Evelyn picked up Thomas, holding him close. "What are you doing here, Margaret?" "Can't family visit family?" Margaret's smile faltered slightly. "Father sent me. He wanted to congratulate you on the trial. We all heard about it, of course. The whole town has been talking." "I'm sure they have. And we're all so proud of you. Really, Evelyn. Standing up to that awful man, fighting for your family. It's quite admirable." Evelyn studied her cousin's face, looking for any trace of sincerity. She found none. "What does your father really want, Margaret?" The pretense crumbled. Margaret's smile disappeared, replaced by something closer to her true feelings: resentment, envy, and a grudging respect that she clearly hated feeling. "Fine. You want honesty? Father's heard that your husband's ranch is doing well. Better than ours, certainly. He thought perhaps, since you've done so well for yourself, you might be willing to help out your family. Alone, nothing more. Just until we get back on our feet." Evelyn stared at her. "Your father sold everything my parents left me. Their jewelry, their books, everything. He told me never to write again. He called me a burden, and now he wants money? Times are hard. Times have always been hard. That didn't stop him from throwing me away like garbage." Margaret's face flushed. "You're being dramatic." "No, I'm being honest. For the first time in years, I'm saying exactly what I mean." Evelyn straightened her spine, the same way she had on that long-ago porch when she left Dusty Hollow forever. "You can tell your father that I have no family in Dusty Hollow. The family I have is here. My husband, my son. Everything else is dead to me." "Evelyn, go home, Margaret, and don't come back." She turned and walked into the house, Thomas in her arms, not looking back. Margaret stood in the yard for a long moment, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. Then she climbed back onto her wagon and drove away, disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust. Cole found Evelyn in the kitchen later, sitting at the table with her head in her hands. Thomas was napping in the nursery. The house was quiet. "I heard," he said, sitting down across from her. "Who was that?" "My cousin, sent by my uncle to ask for money." Cole's expression hardened. "After everything they did to you?" "People have short memories when they need something." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I have no family there anymore. That everything I care about is here." Cole reached across the table, took her hands in his. "Good. That's exactly right." Evelyn looked at him, this man who had been a stranger 18 months ago, who had become her partner, her protector, her home. "I never thought I'd be able to say that," she admitted. "For so long I felt like I owed them something, like I should be grateful for whatever scraps they threw me. But now you know your worth." "Yes." She squeezed his hands. "Now I know my worth." Winter melted into spring, and with it came changes both expected and surprising. Thomas took his first steps in March, lurching across the kitchen floor from Evelyn's arms to Cole's, both of them cheering him on like he had just won a horse race. He said his first word in April, "Mama," clear as a bell, followed 2 days later by "Papa," and Evelyn cried for an hour, tears of joy streaming down her face. The ranch flourished. The cattle survived the winter with minimal losses, and by May, new calves were being born almost daily. The garden that Evelyn had planted was thriving, neat rows of vegetables pushing up through the rich earth. Cole finished the chicken coop he had been working on, and they added a dozen new hens to their flock. And news continued to arrive from the outside world, news that confirmed what Cole had predicted that day outside the courthouse. Nathaniel Drayton was ruined. The scandal of the trial had followed him back to Boston like a plague. His business partners abandoned him. His social connections evaporated. His wife, Catherine, had left him, disappeared, some said, to Europe, where she could finally live free of his cruelty. Without the inheritance he had sought, without the heir he had tried to claim, Drayton's carefully constructed empire began to crumble. There were rumors of debts, of creditors circling, of assets being seized. The man who had once seemed invincible was being destroyed by the very weapons he had used against others. "I almost feel sorry for him," Evelyn said one evening, reading the latest letter from Harrison Blackwood. "Almost." "Don't waste your pity," Cole replied. "He brought this on himself." "I know, but I can't help thinking about Catherine. She sacrificed everything to help us. I hope she's found some peace. If she has any sense, she's somewhere warm, drinking good wine, and never thinking about Nathaniel Drayton again." Evelyn smiled. "I hope you're right." Summer arrived in a blaze of heat and light, and with it came an unexpected invitation. A letter arrived from Millbrook, from the mayor himself. The town was planning a celebration for the 4th of July. A parade, a picnic, fireworks, and they wanted the Maddox family to be the guests of honor. "They want us to what?" Cole asked, reading the letter for the 3rd time. "Be the guests of honor, ride in the parade, give a speech, probably." "A speech?" Cole looked horrified. "I haven't given a speech since my wedding vows, and I barely managed those." "You managed them just fine." Evelyn took the letter from him, scanning it again. "It says the whole territory knows our story. We're an inspiration to frontier families everywhere. They want to celebrate what we've overcome." "I don't need celebrating. I just want to be left alone with my family." "I know." Evelyn set the letter down. "But maybe this isn't about what we need. Maybe it's about what other people need. Other people who are facing their own battles, their own struggles. Maybe our story can give them hope." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "Fine, but I'm not giving a speech." The 4th of July dawned hot and clear, the sky a perfect blue, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and roasting meat. The town of Millbrook had outdone itself. Red, white, and blue, bunting hung from every building, flags flew from every rooftop, and the main street was packed with people from all over the territory. The Maddox family rode in an open carriage at the front of the parade, Cole looking uncomfortable in his rarely worn suit, Evelyn radiant in a new blue dress, Thomas waving at the crowd with the enthusiasm only a toddler could muster. People cheered as they passed. Strangers called out their names, offered congratulations, shouted words of encouragement and admiration. It was overwhelming, more attention than either Cole or Evelyn had ever experienced. But beneath the discomfort, there was something warming, something that felt almost like validation. These people knew their story. They knew about the cruelty, the exile, the battle against impossible odds. And they were cheering not because Cole and Evelyn were rich or powerful, but because they had endured, because they had won. After the parade came the picnic, spread across the town green in a riot of blankets and baskets. Families gathered in clusters, sharing food and conversation, while children ran and played in the summer sun. Cole and Evelyn found themselves surrounded by well-wishers, people who wanted to shake their hands and hear their story firsthand. "Is it true the baby showed up during a blizzard? Is it true that rich man offered you $1,000? Is it true you threatened to shoot him if he didn't leave?" Cole fielded the questions as best he could, sticking close to the truth while leaving out the parts that still felt too raw to share. Evelyn watched him navigate the attention with a grace she wouldn't have thought him capable of, remembering the silent, grieving man she had met not so long ago. He had come so far. They both had. As the afternoon wore on and the crowd began to thin, a familiar figure approached. Harrison Blackwood, the lawyer who had fought for them, looking pleased with himself. "Mr. and Mrs. Maddox, I was hoping to find you." "Mr. Blackwood," Cole shook his hand. "Thank you for everything you did for us." "It was my honor." Blackwood's eyes twinkled. "I've been practicing law for 30 years, and I've never had a case that mattered more, or one that ended more satisfyingly." "Any news about Drayton?" Evelyn asked. Blackwood's expression sobered. "Actually, that's why I wanted to speak with you. I received word this morning. Nathaniel Drayton is dead." The words hung in the air. Evelyn felt Cole's hand tighten on her arm. Dead? She repeated. How? His own hand, apparently. His creditors had seized everything, his home, his business, his assets. He had nothing left. They found him in a hotel room in New York last week. Evelyn didn't know what to feel. Relief? Pity? Some strange mixture of both? This was the man who had threatened to take her son, who had driven Clara Wells to her death, who had made Catherine Drayton's life a living hell. And yet he had also been a human being, broken in his own way, destroyed by his own demons. What happens to his estate? Cole asked. What little remains will go to the cousin he despised. Ironic, isn't it? He destroyed his life trying to keep that inheritance, and in the end, it went to the man he hated anyway. And Catherine, his wife? Safe, as far as I know. She's been in Paris for several months. I don't imagine she's grieving. No, Evelyn thought, I don't imagine she is. They rode home that evening as the fireworks began, bright bursts of color painting the darkening sky. Thomas squealed with delight at each explosion, his tiny hands reaching for the lights as if he could catch them. Cole drove in silence, his thoughts far away. Evelyn watched him, knowing what he was feeling, knowing because she felt it too. It was over. Truly over. Drayton was dead, his threats extinguished, his shadow finally lifted from their lives. They were free. Are you all right? She asked quietly. Cole nodded slowly. I'm trying to decide how to feel. And? I don't feel anything. Not happy, not sad. Just, he searched for the word. Empty. Like a storm has passed, and now there's just silence. That's normal, I think. After everything we've been through, it's hard to believe it's really finished. Is it finished? He glanced at her. Drayton is dead, but the world is still full of people like him. People who take what they want, hurt whoever gets in their way. What's to stop someone else from coming for us? From coming for Thomas? Evelyn considered the question. It was one she had asked herself many times in the dark hours of the night when fear crept in like a thief. Nothing, she said finally. Nothing can guarantee our safety. Life doesn't work that way. But that's true for everyone, isn't it? The only thing we can do is live. Love each other, protect each other, build something worth fighting for. And if trouble comes again, she reached over, took his hand. We'll face it together, like we always have. Cole looked at her, at the woman who had arrived on his doorstep, soaked and exhausted and carrying the weight of 1,000 judgments. The woman who had brought his house back to life, who had thawed his frozen heart, who had given him a reason to keep going. How did I get so lucky? He murmured. Evelyn laughed. Lucky? We've been through bankruptcy, scandal, legal battles, and a man who tried to steal our child. I'm not sure lucky is the word I'd use. I am. He raised her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. Every day I wake up next to you, I'm the luckiest man alive. The fireworks continued to explode overhead, brilliant and brief, illuminating the darkness for a moment before fading into memory. But the light they carried home with them, the light of their family, their love, their future, that light would never fade. They were the Maddoxes. Cole and Evelyn and Thomas. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The seasons turned, as they always do, carrying the Maddox family forward into a future none of them could have imagined. Summer faded into autumn, autumn surrendered to winter, and winter melted once more into spring. Thomas grew from a toddling infant into a curious, bright-eyed child who followed his father around the ranch like a shadow and helped his mother in the garden with more enthusiasm than skill. The house that had once been a shrine to grief now rang with laughter, with chatter, with the 1,000 small sounds of a family living fully. Cole changed in ways that sometimes startled even himself. The man who had spent 4 years speaking barely a dozen words a day now told stories at the dinner table, sang half-remembered songs while he worked, and could be heard throughout the property calling out to Thomas with a warmth that would have been unthinkable just 2 years before. "Papa, look!" Thomas would shout, holding up a frog or interesting rock or whatever treasure he had discovered that day. And Cole would stop whatever he was doing, crouch down to his son's level, and examine the find with complete seriousness. "Well now, that's quite something. Where'd you find that?" Evelyn watched these moments from afar, her heart so full it sometimes felt like it might burst. This was what she had dreamed of during all those lonely years in Dusty Hollow. This was the family she had been told she could never have. And yet here it was. Real. Tangible. Hers. The second anniversary of Thomas's arrival passed quietly, marked only by a special dinner and a cake that Evelyn had baked herself. They didn't speak much about the circumstances that had brought him to them, the storm, the dying woman, the battle that had followed, but both of them felt the weight of the day, the significance of how far they had come. 2 years, Cole said that night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. Thomas was asleep inside, worn out from a day of running and playing. Feels like a lifetime. A good lifetime? The best. He reached over, took her hand. I never told you this, but that night, the night Clara arrived, I almost didn't open the door. Evelyn turned to look at him. What? I heard the knock, and my first thought was to ignore it. Let whoever it was freeze. I was tired of the world, tired of people, tired of everything. I almost just let it go. But you didn't. No, something made me get up, some voice in the back of my head that said this was important, that I couldn't turn away. He paused, his throat tight. If I had ignored that voice. But you didn't, Evelyn repeated, squeezing his hand. You opened the door. You let her in. You let me help. And everything that came after, the good and the bad, the joy and the fear, it all happened because you chose to open that door. I guess that's the thing, isn't it? Life is just a series of doors. Some we open, some we keep closed. The trick is knowing which ones matter, and being brave enough to walk through them. Cole nodded slowly. Being brave enough. Yes. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, an owl calling in the distance, the soft lowing of cattle in the pasture. Do you ever regret it? Evelyn asked finally. Any of it. Not for a second. His voice was firm, certain. You? Never. Not even the hard parts. Especially not the hard parts. She leaned her head against his shoulder. They made us who we are. In the 3rd year after the trial, an unexpected letter arrived. It was from Catherine Drayton, or Catherine Wells, as she now called herself, having reclaimed her maiden name. She had settled in a small town in the south of France, she wrote, where no one knew her history and she could finally live without fear. I think of you often, she wrote. I think of the little boy you're raising, and I hope he is happy and healthy and loved. I think of the courage it took for you to fight for him, and I draw strength from your example. I wanted you to know that I have found peace at last. I have a small house with a garden, and I spend my days reading and walking and simply existing without terror. It is a simple life, perhaps, but after everything I endured, simplicity is a gift. I also wanted to thank you, not just for what you did for Thomas, but for what you showed me was possible. I spent 15 years believing I was trapped, that there was no escape from the life I had chosen. You proved that wasn't true. You proved that it is never too late to fight for a better future. I hope we never meet again, not because I don't care for you, but because meeting would mean that something has gone wrong. But please know that wherever I am, whatever I am doing, I carry your family in my heart. You are proof that goodness can triumph over evil, that love can conquer cruelty. Be well, be happy, and give that beautiful boy a kiss from the stranger who helped save him. With gratitude and affection, Catherine. Evelyn read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she showed it to Cole, who read it in silence, his jaw tight with emotion. She deserved better, he said finally. She has better now. That's what matters. They kept the letter, tucked away in a box with other precious things. The photograph of Clara that they had found in her belongings, the small blanket Thomas had been wrapped in when he arrived, the legal documents confirming their adoption. Physical reminders of the journey that had brought them here. The 4th year brought another change, this one unexpected in a different way. It started with Evelyn feeling tired. More tired than usual, she told herself, dismissing the fatigue as a consequence of the busy spring planting season. But the tiredness persisted, accompanied by other symptoms she tried to ignore: nausea in the mornings, a sensitivity to certain smells, a tenderness in her breasts that she hadn't felt since. She didn't dare to hope. The doctors had been clear all those years ago. It was almost impossible, they had said. Don't expect miracles. But when a month passed and then another, and the symptoms only grew stronger, she finally gathered the courage to visit Dr. Whitfield in Millbrook. He examined her thoroughly, asked questions she answered with a trembling voice, and then sat back in his chair with an expression she couldn't read. "Mrs. Maddox," he said slowly, "I want you to prepare yourself for some surprising news." "What is it? Am I sick?" "No." A smile broke across his weathered face. "You're pregnant." The word didn't make sense. She heard it, but her mind refused to process it. That's impossible. The doctors said..." "I know what the doctors said. And they weren't wrong, exactly. Your condition made conception extremely unlikely, but unlikely isn't the same as impossible." Dr. Whitfield leaned forward. "Sometimes, Mrs. Maddox, the body surprises us. Sometimes miracles happen." Evelyn rode home in a daze. She found Cole in the barn, mending a bridle, and stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching him work. He looked up, saw her expression, and immediately set down his tools. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Her voice was strange, distant. "I saw Dr. Whitfield." Fear flickered across Cole's face. And she took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was the loudest Evelyn had ever heard. Cole stared at her. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. "Cole? Say something." He stopped, swallowed hard. "You're sure?" "Dr. Whitfield is sure. He says it's a miracle, that it shouldn't be possible, but somehow..." She laughed, a sound halfway between joy and disbelief. "Somehow it happened." Cole crossed the barn in 3 strides and swept her into his arms. He was crying, this strong, stoic man who had faced down outlaws and lawyers and his own crushing grief, crying like a child. "A baby," he managed. "Our baby. Our baby." They stood there in the barn, holding each other, laughing and crying and trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. After everything they had been through, after all the pain and struggle and heartbreak, life had given them one more gift, one more miracle. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, defying all the dire predictions of Evelyn's past. Dr. Whitfield monitored her closely, but there were no complications, no crises. Her body, which had been declared broken and useless, proved stronger than anyone had believed. Thomas, now 3 years old, was fascinated by the changes in his mother. He would press his ear to her growing belly, listening for movement, and shriek with delight when he felt a kick. "That's your brother or sister in there," Evelyn told him. "They're going to come out soon, and you're going to be a big brother." "Big brother," Thomas repeated solemnly, as if accepting a sacred responsibility. "I'll teach them everything." "I know you will." The baby arrived in early October, on a day when the leaves were turning gold and the air had the crisp bite of approaching winter. It was a girl, small and perfect, with her father's dark hair and her mother's determined chin. They named her Clara. "After the woman who gave us Thomas," Evelyn said, cradling the newborn in her arms. "After the woman who trusted us with her son. I want our daughter to carry that legacy. The legacy of sacrifice and love and hope against all odds." Cole looked at his family, his wife, exhausted but radiant, his son, peering at his new sister with wide eyes, his daughter, so small and so impossibly precious, and felt something shift inside him. The last remnant of the wall he had built around his heart, the last trace of the grief that had defined him for so long finally crumbled away. "Clara," he repeated, "it's perfect." News of the baby spread quickly, and with it spread a new chapter of the legend that had grown around the Maddox family. The barren woman who had been sent away as a joke, who had won a court battle for her adopted son, had now given birth to a healthy child. The miracle was complete. In Dusty Hollow, the news landed with particular force. Harold Carter, Evelyn's uncle, had died the previous winter, a bitter, lonely death, mourned by few. His daughter Margaret had married a man from a neighboring county, eager to escape the failing farm and the whispers that followed her family. The Whitmore farm had been sold to pay debts, and Thomas Whitmore himself had moved to California, seeking a fresh start where no one knew his history. The town that had cast Evelyn out was slowly fading, its population dwindling, its buildings falling into disrepair. In a few more decades, it would be nothing but a ghost town, a forgotten footnote in the history of the West. But the ranch that Cole and Evelyn had built was thriving. They expanded over the years, buying neighboring land as it became available, building a herd that was the envy of the territory. The small house that had once sheltered a broken widower grew into a proper homestead, with additions for the children and a wide porch where the family gathered on summer evenings. Thomas grew into a strong, kind young man who had his mother's determination and his father's quiet strength. He knew the story of his birth mother. Cole and Evelyn had told him when he was old enough to understand, and he honored her memory while never doubting the love of the family that had raised him. "You chose me," he said once, when he was 12 years old and asking the questions that all children eventually ask. "You didn't have to keep me. You could have given me to that man, taken his money, lived an easier life, but you chose me." "We didn't just choose you," Evelyn told him, pulling him close. "We fought for you. We went to war for you, and we would do it again 1,000 times over." "Why?" "Because you're our son. Because love isn't about blood or biology. It's about who shows up, who stays, who would lay down their life for you without a second thought." She touched his face, this boy who had arrived on her doorstep in the arms of a dying woman, who had become the center of her universe. "You are loved, Thomas. Never doubt that. You are loved beyond measure." Clara grew up hearing the stories of her family's past, the exile, the blizzard, the trial, and she carried them with her like treasures. She was a fierce, passionate girl who inherited her namesake's courage and her mother's resilience. When she was old enough, she went east to study medicine, determined to help others the way Dr. Whitfield had helped her family. "I want to be there for women like my mother was," she explained before she left. "Women who are told they're broken, that they can't do what their bodies were supposedly made for. I want to give them hope." "You already give hope," Cole told her, "just by existing, just by being who you are." The years continued to pass as years do, carrying joy and sorrow in equal measure. Cole's hair went gray, then white. Evelyn's face lined with the marks of a life fully lived. But their love never dimmed, never faded. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared history and mutual devotion. They buried old Samuel from Dusty Hollow, who had remained a friend until the end. They celebrated when Thomas married a schoolteacher from Millbrook and gave them grandchildren to spoil. They wept with pride when Clara opened her medical practice in Denver and began changing lives. And every year, on the anniversary of Clara Wells's death, they visited her grave on the hill overlooking the ranch. They told her about her son, about the man he was becoming, about the family that had grown from her sacrifice. "Thank you," Evelyn would whisper, kneeling in the grass beside the simple wooden cross. "Thank you for trusting us. Thank you for giving us this gift." One evening, late in their lives, Cole and Evelyn sat together on the porch they had shared for nearly 40 years. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the ranch spread out before them. The fields, the pastures, the house that had sheltered 3 generations. "Do you remember," Cole said, his voice soft and worn with age, "the day you arrived here? Soaked and exhausted, with nothing but a carpet bag and a whole lot of hurt?" Evelyn smiled, the memory both distant and immediate. "I remember being terrified. I remember thinking my life was over. And now?" She looked at him, this man who had been a stranger, then a partner, then a husband, then the love of her life. His face was weathered, his body bent by decades of hard work, but his eyes were the same eyes that had looked at her with such kindness on that first day, when she was nothing but a discarded woman, and he was nothing but a ghost. "Now I know it was just beginning." Cole took her hand, the same way he had 1,000 times before. "They sent you here as a joke," he said. "They thought they were punishing us both. 2 broken people stuck together in the middle of nowhere. And instead? Instead, we built something beautiful, a family, a legacy, a life." Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "The town that cast me out is gone now," she said. "Thomas Whitmore is dead. My uncle is dead. Everyone who laughed at me, who pitied me, who thought I was worthless, they're all gone. But we're still here." "We're still here," Cole agreed, "and so is everything we built." They sat in silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The same stars that had shone down on them that first night, when Evelyn arrived frightened and alone. The same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the birth of their children. The same stars that would continue to shine long after they were gone, illuminating the land that the Maddox family had claimed and cultivated and loved. "Cole," Evelyn said softly. "Yes?" "I love you. I've loved you since the moment you called me your wife in front of that outlaw, even when it was a lie. I've loved you through everything we've faced, and I'll love you until my last breath." Cole turned to look at her, this woman who had transformed his life, who had given him reasons to hope when he had none. "It was never a lie," he said. "Not really. I just didn't know it yet." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, a kiss that held 40 years of history and a lifetime of love. The barren woman who had been sent to a lone cowboy as a joke had come back with a child, and so much more. She had come back with a family, a legacy, a love story that would be told for generations. The cruel joke had become the greatest blessing the West had ever seen, and the two broken souls who had found each other in the wilderness lived out their days surrounded by children and grandchildren, by laughter and love, by all the things they had once believed impossible. Together, always together, until the very end.